Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My name's DuRan, and this happened a couple years back when I was hiking out near the Rio Grande, south of Lajitas. I'd taken a couple days off work to clear my head and figured I'd camp one night along the river. That stretch isn't exactly remote. Folks fish there and you'll see the odd border patrol truck. But you can walk a mile or two and not hear anything but the wind. It was late afternoon, still plenty of daylight, with that heavy heat where the air feels like it's pressing down on you. The river was low, slow-moving, and the sky was that washed-out pale blue you get before sunset starts to tint everything. I was on a narrow dirt trail running along a bluff, maybe 30 or 40 feet above the water. On the other side of the river was nothing but scrub and distant hills. I'd stopped for water, leaning on my trekking pole when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Not a bird, not a plane, it was too close for that. I turned and saw, I don't know how to put it exactly. It was shaped like a wide, shallow bowl, silver or chrome, but not shining like metal. More like it was reflecting the color of the sky and land around it, only warped, like the way heat makes a mirage shimmer. It wasn't flying level. It was tilted, maybe 45 degrees, and it drifted sideways, slow, smooth, without any sound I could hear. I watched it move toward a low ridge ahead of me. I kept expecting it to make noise, rotors, engines, something, but it just slid through the air and disappeared behind the ridge like someone pulling a card under the edge of a table. I stood there, thinking it had to be a drone. People bring them out here sometimes, though usually you hear the buzzing from half a mile off. I waited for it to pop back up or hear someone call out. Nothing. I started walking again, faster this time. The trail wound closer to where I'd seen it go down. The sun was dropping lower and the light was going that dusty gold color. When I got to the top of the ridge, I stopped and looked around. I expected, honestly, I don't know what I expected. A guy standing there with a controller? A crashed drone? Something. But the space behind the ridge was just flat ground sloping toward the river, scattered with creosote and some boulders. No sound, no movement. I walked down into it feeling weird about being so quiet on my own. Then I noticed the smell. It was sharp, clean, like the air right after lightning strikes, but stronger. Ozone. There weren't any storms anywhere near us that day, and no power lines out there either. The smell was strongest near a bare patch of dirt between two rocks. The ground there was darker, like it had been damp recently, but when I crouched down and touched it, it was dry and warm. I stood there for a minute, scanning every direction. The river was a dull green strip in the distance, the hills behind it still in sunlight. No dust trails from trucks. No bird song, which struck me then. Just that low hiss of wind moving through the brush. I didn't like how still it felt, so I started moving again. The trail cut back toward the bluff, and as I climbed, I kept glancing over my shoulder. That's when I saw something flash far off to the west. It wasn't a blink like a mirror catching light. It was more like the air itself flexed and then settled. It happened twice in the same spot, then nothing. I made it back to the bluff edge and kept going toward where I'd planned to camp, but the whole time I had this pressure in my ears, like when you're in an airplane before it equalizes. I tried swallowing, yawning, nothing helped. The smell faded by the time I was a couple hundred yards away. Around sunset, I reached a spot with a flat stretch of ground above the river and set up my little tent. I built a small fire in the ring left by whoever had camped there before. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind picked up, bringing that rustle from the mesquite. I made some instant noodles, sat watching the sky go from orange to dark blue, trying to shake off the afternoon. About an hour after full dark, I heard something. Not footsteps, more like a low hum, far away but steady. It reminded me of the vibration you get standing near big transformers, only softer. I turned off my headlamp and sat still, letting my eyes adjust. The stars out there are like nowhere else, and the Milky Way was bright enough to cast a faint light on the ground. The hum grew, then faded, then came back. No rhythm to it. I couldn't tell if it was from across the river or up the trail. I kept scanning the horizon for any light. Campfires, flashlights, a vehicle, but there was nothing. No glow from Lajitas, no headlights on the road. At one point, the hum cut out completely, replaced by this quick, high-pitched ringing just for a second. It made me flinch. Then, silence again. I decided right then I wasn't staying another night. I could handle snakes, wild hogs, even the idea of a mountain lion out there, but this was different. There was nothing to prepare for. No clear threat to react to. Just things happening that shouldn't. I didn't sleep much. Every time I dozed off, I'd wake thinking I'd heard that hum again. Around 4 a.m., I gave up, packed my gear by headlamp, and started walking out. The air was cool and dry, my breath visible in the beam of the light. The only sounds were my boots on the dirt and the river moving below. Half a mile in, I stopped to drink some water and looked out toward the hills. And I swear, for just a moment, I saw that same warped shimmer, like heat rising, but it was 40 degrees out, and it was well before sunrise. It rippled once, then was gone. I stood there holding my breath until the wind moved again. By the time I got back to my truck, the eastern sky was pale and the stars were fading. I tossed my pack in, got in, and just sat for a second with my hands on the wheel, looking out over the scrub. There was nothing moving, nothing in the air, just Texas waking up, same as always. But I couldn't stop thinking about that smell, hanging there in the middle of nowhere, and how the ground had been warm under my hand. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was rolling down I-35 just south of Laredo, Texas. I'd been driving most of the day, headed back home to San Antonio after a week-long visit with family. The kind of trip where you don't sleep much because there's always somebody talking, food to eat, places to see, Texas-style busy. By the time I hit that gas station on the edge of town, I was beat. So I pulled off to stretch my legs and grab some gas and a cold bottle of water. The station was one of those old, no-frills places with flickering neon signs and one of those rickety outdoor air pumps that always sound like they're about to fall apart. There was hardly anybody around, just a couple of other late-night drivers, maybe a trucker or two. I went inside, grabbed what I needed, and stepped back out. The sky was clear, the stars just barely twinkling above the glow of the gas station's lights. I was about to start filling up when out of the corner of my eye I noticed something weird behind the pumps. A soft, steady red glow hovering maybe 6 or 7 feet off the ground. It wasn't like a light on a pole or the station's signage. This was a round, glowing sphere. It looked solid, but it shimmered faintly, like the light wasn't quite stable. I blinked a couple times, thinking maybe my eyes were tired or the glare was playing tricks, but it didn't go away. The sphere just hung there, silent, barely pulsing with that deep red light. Nothing made sense about it. No wires, no stands holding it up, just this glowing ball floating in place. I pulled out my phone, figured I'd get a picture. I aimed the camera at it, and the moment the sphere filled the screen, my phone froze. The camera app wouldn't respond, just a still shot of the glowing red orb locked in place like a paused video. I poked at the screen trying to close the camera, but the phone was unresponsive for a good 20 seconds. I was about to give up and set it down when suddenly the sphere shot straight up, like someone cut the cord on a balloon. It moved so fast it disappeared beyond the treetops in a blink, leaving a faint afterglow for a moment before the sky was empty again. I swear, the whole thing didn't take more than a minute, but it felt like time slowed down. The other folks at the pumps didn't seem to notice a thing. I looked around to see if anyone else had seen it. Nobody. Just me, standing there with my dumbfounded face and a frozen phone. I tried restarting the camera. It worked fine after that, but the moment was gone. I checked my phone's gallery. No new photos or videos of the sphere. It was like it had never been there at all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. On my way back to the car, I noticed the streetlight nearest the pumps was flickering weird, like it was struggling for power. The air felt heavy, almost thick. Then, faintly, I heard a hum. Low and steady, like a transformer or some big machine, but there was no equipment around except for the usual pumps and signs. I jumped in my truck, started it up, and took off without filling up. Figured I'd just hit the next station down the road. But even driving away, I kept glancing in my mirrors. There was a car a few hundred yards behind me, but when I looked again, it was gone. No other cars around on the road. That night, I kept checking my phone trying to make sense of what had happened. The frozen camera, the red orb, the weird hum, it all felt too strange to ignore, but I had no clue what to make of it. A trick of light? Some sort of electrical glitch? I told myself I must have been tired and seeing things. The next day, I asked around, but no one else reported anything out of the ordinary near that station. The workers just shrugged it off, said it was probably one of those old streetlights flickering again. I'm still not sure what I saw. Could have been some kind of malfunction or maybe something else. Whatever it was, it didn't hurt nobody and didn't stick around long enough to figure out. But every time I drive past that spot now, I catch myself looking over my shoulder just in case that glowing red light decides to come back for another visit. My name's Cody Ramirez, born and raised in Houston, but I've spent a good bit of time camping out in Sam Houston National Forest. It's a place I know pretty well. Tall pines, thick underbrush, that quiet that only happens when you're deep in the woods, far from the city buzz. Most folks go there to get away, hike a bit, maybe fish or shoot the breeze around a campfire. Me and a couple friends set out one weekend last spring, just looking for some downtime. We got to our campsite late afternoon, clear skies, but that kind of heavy humidity you get in Texas when spring's turning to summer. We picked a spot near a bend in one of the little creeks that runs through the forest. The usual setup: tents, fire pit, coolers with cold beer and sandwiches. Nothing fancy, just a simple weekend. The first evening was normal enough. We cooked dinner over the fire, talked about work and family stuff, the usual. After the sun went down, we sat around the fire swapping stories. Around 10 or so, I noticed something odd out in the trees on the edge of the campsite. There were these little spots of white light, flickering between the trunks, moving slowly, like fireflies, but way too bright and steady for that. At first, I thought maybe it was some weird reflection, maybe someone's flashlight far off in the woods, or even a reflection from a passing car on a distant road. But it wasn't right. The lights didn't stay in one place, and they weren't random like fireflies. They moved in patterns, weaving between the trees at eye level. I pointed it out to the others. "Hey, y'all see those lights over there?" Mark, who's been camping with me a few times, leaned over. "Yeah. Looks like someone's got a light show out in the woods." We joked about it for a minute, thinking maybe some kids were screwing around with flashlights, but there was no sound, no voices or anything else. Just those bright white spots gliding between the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to take a closer look. As I stepped away from the fire, the lights shifted, retreating deeper into the forest, always staying just out of reach, like they were teasing us. No matter how fast I walked or how far I moved, they kept drifting away, never close enough to catch. I called Mark and Luis to come with me. We followed the lights for maybe a half hour, winding through the pines and oaks. The air was thick and still, except for the soft crunch of our boots on dead leaves. The lights moved smoothly, never flashing or blinking, just gliding quietly. Sometimes they'd split into 2 or 3, then come back together. Luis whispered, "This ain't right. Feels like we're being watched or something." I didn't say much. I was more puzzled than scared, but there was definitely a weird tension in the air. The forest usually sounds like a living thing, bugs, frogs, birds, but that night it felt like someone had pressed mute. At one point, the lights stopped near a fallen tree trunk. We slowed down, holding our breath. The lights just hung there, bright as day, no shadows, no glow around them. I raised my hand trying to touch one, and it slid away like it was made of smoke or mist. Mark joked nervously, "What are they, ghosts, or one of them fancy drones?" I shook my head. No drone could fly that quiet or move that smoothly in such tight spaces. And if it was someone else out here, why wouldn't they come closer or talk to us? We stayed out there a while longer, but the lights started drifting again, slowly moving toward a thicker patch of trees. We followed as best we could, but then suddenly they just vanished, like someone turned off a switch. 1 second they were there, the next, gone. We stood in the dark, the only sound the breeze rustling through the needles above. Our flashlights felt weak and useless against the night pressing in. We decided to head back, uneasy but trying not to freak ourselves out. On the walk back, Mark kept glancing behind us like he expected something to be following, but there was nothing. Just the shadows of the trees stretching long under the moonlight. Back at the campsite, things felt off. The fire seemed dull, the air heavier somehow. We didn't talk much. Luis packed his gear early and said he wanted to get out of there before dawn. I stayed up a bit longer, staring at the tree line where the lights had disappeared. I thought about walking over to check, but something held me back. That silence out there wasn't natural. Before drifting off, I noticed my phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual for that part of the forest, but something about it added to the feeling of isolation. In the morning, we packed up and left quick, all of us quiet on the drive back. Nobody mentioned the lights again, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. Whatever we saw wasn't just some kids with flashlights. I've been back to Sam Houston plenty since, but I haven't seen those lights again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, or if the forest just decided to keep it secret. Either way, every time I'm near those trees now, I feel like I'm being watched, like the woods remember. I was driving home late one Saturday night on State Highway 71 out near Llano. It's a stretch I know well, mostly empty road, rolling hills on either side, a few ranches spaced out enough that you don't see a soul for miles. I'd been out visiting my cousin in town and was looking forward to getting back to my place before too late. The sky was clear, stars bright, and the kind of quiet you only get out in the hill country. I was doing about 65, headlights cutting through the dark when, just up ahead, I noticed a pale light hovering low, right over the road. It wasn't like a car or a truck. The shape didn't have edges or a body I could make out. Just this soft, pale glow, like the color of those old mercury vapor street lamps, but floating maybe 4 feet above the asphalt. It flickered a bit, like it was struggling to hold steady but didn't move. At first, I figured maybe it was some road flare or a piece of trash caught on a sign or something, but there weren't any signs there, just open road and a small rise to the left where the land crests before dropping down toward the creek. No buildings, no lights from anywhere. I slowed down, kept my eyes on it, and the light stayed. It wasn't warm or harsh, more like a dim bulb someone left on by accident. Then, right as my headlights were about to reach it, the light just vanished. Like someone turned it off. The air where it had been was just black. The moment my beams hit that spot, I saw nothing there. No flicker, no glow, no reflection. Just the regular flat black of asphalt and the faint outline of the brush along the shoulder. I blinked a few times and slowed down some more, looking for anything that could explain it, but there was nothing. I kept driving, my pulse picking up a little. That stretch of 71's pretty straight and open, and I'd been watching the light for a good 30 seconds before it blinked out, so I wasn't imagining it. A mile or so down the road, I caught a glimpse of some small movement off to the right, where the mesquite trees lined the hill. It wasn't a deer or a coyote, not the way it moved. It was quick, deliberate, and it vanished before I could get a proper look. I shook my head and told myself it was just the night messing with me. The shadows in the brush, maybe a bobcat or something. The night can play tricks if you're alone long enough. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching. My skin prickled like when a storm's rolling in, but the sky's clear. About halfway home, the radio suddenly dropped into static. I was tuned to a local station playing some old country songs, but the music cut out completely. For a minute, all I had was this low static buzz. I fiddled with the dial, but none of the stations would come in clearly. The static wasn't like interference from hills or storms. It was steady, like a wall of white noise pressed against the car. I pulled over at a turnout to check my phone, but of course no service out there. Typical. When I looked back up, the road was empty. No lights behind me, no other cars anywhere. Then, from the edge of the trees on the left, I caught the faintest flash of something. Just a glimmer, like a reflection, or maybe a pair of eyes. I stared, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. When I turned my head to get a better angle, the flash was gone. I didn't want to sit there longer, so I got back in the truck and kept going. When I passed the spot where that light had hovered, I slowed even more and scanned the ditch and the trees again. There was nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs anyone had been there. Just that empty stretch of road. But the weirdest part was the silence. Not the usual country silence. No crickets, no frogs, no night birds. It was like the whole area had been wrapped in cotton. Even the hum from the engine sounded muffled. I put the truck in drive and started moving again, trying to shake the weird feeling in my gut. The radio came back on about 5 minutes later, like nothing had happened. The DJ was talking about the weather like a normal Saturday night. Still, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, feeling like I might see something, but all I saw was black road and the occasional flicker of headlights from the distant highway junction near town. By the time I got home, I was more tired than I'd thought, but I couldn't settle in. Every time I looked out the window, I thought about that light, how it just vanished right before my eyes, and how everything felt like it was holding its breath on that stretch of road. I checked the truck the next morning, thinking maybe some light from a stray reflector had caught my eye or a road crew had been out there. Nothing. The windshield was clean. No dirt or dust that would have made a reflection. The tires had no unusual wear and the truck ran smooth as always. I asked around the next day, mentioning the light to a couple of local guys who knew the area. One told me about a similar thing he'd seen a few years back, something hovering low, flickering, disappearing. Said he didn't know what it was either, but he wasn't about to hang around and find out. Another guy just laughed and said maybe I'd been looking at a will-o'-the-wisp or some road ghost, but he said it in that half-joking way that's really just saying, I don't have a clue. I've been back on 71 plenty since then, and nothing like that light's ever come back. But sometimes when the night's just right, clear, quiet, and with that wide open sky, you can still feel it there, just past the curve where the trees lean in close to the road. I don't know what it was. Could have been a trick of the eyes, some weird electrical thing, or maybe just my mind playing with shadows and light. Whatever it was, it felt deliberate, like something watching, waiting. I guess out here, that's just part of the night. You learn to keep your eyes open, but not so open, you lose your mind. Fishing at Lake Buchanan wasn't unusual for me. I'd grown up around the hill country, and the lake was just about the closest thing I had to a second home. My name's Roy Daniels, born and raised near Burnett, and on weekends, when the weather was right, I'd haul out my old fishing gear and spend hours just sitting by the water. Quiet, peaceful, no phones, no noise, just me and the lake. This one afternoon in early June started out normal enough. It was getting close to sunset and the heat was easing off. I was out on the little wooden dock near the east side of the lake, casting my line toward the deeper water. The wind was light, just enough to ruffle the surface. I'd been catching catfish and the occasional bass. Nothing exciting, but enough to keep me patient. You get used to waiting when you fish. Around 7 o'clock, I noticed something odd. Not on the surface, no ripples or waves, but just under the water, maybe 6 or 7 feet down, a dark shape. At first, I thought it was a big base or maybe a snagged log, but it was too smooth, too deliberate. The shape was elongated, about the size of a medium-sized boat engine cover, but darker, like an oil slick, except it had a form. I kept my eyes on it, thinking maybe it was a shadow from a passing cloud or the way the sun angled through the water. But then it moved, and I mean moved fast, quicker than any fish or turtle I'd ever seen around those parts. It slid silently beneath the surface, gliding smoothly without any disturbance or bubbles. No splash, no sound at all. That's when I waved my hand, just to see if maybe I could get a better look or if it was something floating or drifting. The shape stopped instantly, as if it noticed me. For a second, I thought I saw it change its angle like it was watching back. Then, just like that, it vanished. No ripples, no splash, nothing left behind. I blinked a few times, wondering if I'd imagined it. The lake was calm again, the sun dipping lower behind the hills. I looked around, but there was no boat or animal anywhere near me. Just the quiet water and the sound of the wind through the trees. I sat back down on the dock, trying to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with a little unease. I'm used to the lake and the critters in it, but that thing didn't fit any of it. I started fishing again, but my mind wasn't on the line anymore. A few minutes later, I heard something, soft like a low thump coming from beneath the water, farther out. Not a splash or a rock skipping, more like a muffled mechanical noise, rhythmic but irregular. I leaned forward, eyes scanning the surface, but saw nothing. The light was fading fast, and I figured it was time to pack up. I stood and stretched, and the air felt suddenly heavier, like the evening was holding its breath. That's when I noticed something else odd. My shadow on the dock was darker than usual, almost like it had edges that blurred, like a charcoal sketch with soft lines. I blinked and looked down at my boots. Nothing there but dirt and a couple of dried leaves. I shook my head and started gathering my gear, but then I caught sight of the trees along the shoreline. The shadows they cast weren't moving like they should with the breeze. Instead, they looked still, almost like they were holding perfectly still, like someone had turned off the wind just in that patch. The hairs on my neck prickled again. I wasn't sure if I was tired or if the sun messing with my eyes was playing tricks on me, but it felt real enough. I pulled my jacket tighter and decided to head back to the truck. Walking along the dirt path from the dock to the parking area, the woods felt too quiet. Usually there'd be birds settling down, frogs croaking, or the rustle of critters in the brush. That night, not a sound. The only thing breaking the silence was the crunch of my boots on gravel and leaves. I glanced back toward the lake and caught a glimpse of something pale just beyond the tree line. It was shaped kind of like a person, but it didn't move. Not a blink, not a shift. When I looked again, it was gone. That got my heart rate up, but I told myself it was probably some log or a trick of the shadows. By the time I reached my truck, it was almost dark. I sat inside for a minute, started the engine, and noticed the radio wasn't working. Static, just static, even though I usually got a decent signal there. I fiddled with the dial, but nothing changed. Odd, but maybe just interference or a dead battery in the radio. I pulled onto the road, heading back toward town, and about halfway there, the street lights flickered once or twice. Then my headlights dimmed briefly, just for a second. The truck didn't stall or anything, but it felt strange, like something was playing with the power. That's when I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a dim, pale light hanging over the road behind me. It wasn't moving, just hovering there, too low and too steady to be any plane or helicopter I'd seen around those parts. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but every time I approached the light, it would blink out, leaving nothing but darkness behind. I kept driving, heart pounding, eyes darting between the mirror and the road. I didn't know what I was seeing, and I sure as hell didn't want to get out to check. I just wanted to get home. Once I hit the city limits of Burnett, the light was gone. The radio started working again, and the truck ran normal. I didn't look back. I'm not the type to make up stories or look for attention, and I don't claim to understand what I saw, but some things that day just didn't fit with the world I know. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or some strange fish nobody's noticed before. Maybe it was something else. I still go back to Lake Buchanan sometimes, but I don't fish near that dock anymore. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear that quiet thump beneath the water again. I was out running near the San Marcos River just before dawn. Name's Daniel Morales, and I've been living around here for most of my life, born and raised not too far from the riverbanks. Running's always been my go-to for clearing my head, especially early mornings when the world's still quiet and the city feels like it's holding its breath before waking up. That morning, I left the house around 5:30. The sky was still that deep, heavy blue you get before sunrise, and the air had that cool edge that means the heat's gonna come on strong by noon. I'd planned a usual route, a loop that follows the river trail, cuts through some woods, then back around the downtown area. Nothing fancy. The first couple miles were the same as always. My feet hit the cracked pavement steady, my breath coming out in little puffs. The trail wasn't busy, just a couple of other early risers and a few dogs being walked. I was halfway through when I hit this small clearing I hadn't really paid attention to before. It's not a big deal, just a spot where the trees thin out a bit, and you get this open patch with grass and a few scattered rocks, kind of tucked away from the rest of the trail. As soon as I stepped into that clearing, something felt off. The air got thick all of a sudden, like somebody turned the humidity way up. But that wasn't it. It felt colder too, which made no sense with the humidity. My skin prickled, the kind of feeling when you walk into a room and know something's just not right but can't say why. I slowed down and my breath came out slower, fogging in front of me. I glanced at my smartwatch without stopping, and that's when I noticed the weird part. The screen lit up, but the timer jumped ahead by almost 12 minutes. Just like that. 1 second I was at 6:01, and the next it read 6:13. I stopped running right there. My heart started pounding, but not like I was scared, more like I was confused. I looked around the clearing, trying to find something, anything, that would explain how 12 minutes just disappeared. There was nothing. The trail continued on the other side, the trees swaying lightly, a bird or two waking up in the distance, but nothing to explain the jump in time. I had no memory of stopping, no memory of anything between the two times. I rubbed my wrist, hoping maybe my watch was glitching out. I tapped the screen a few times, checked the battery, checked the settings. Everything looked fine. It wasn't like the battery had died or the watch had reset. It was just missing 12 minutes from the clock. That's when I noticed something else. The clearing was silent. Dead silent. Usually around this time you get at least a few birds chirping or the rustle of leaves from a breeze, but the air was completely still, like someone pressed mute on the whole place. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was tired or my brain was playing tricks on me. I started running again, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. About 100 yards down the path, I caught sight of movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting between the trees. I turned my head fast, but whatever it was melted away before I could get a good look. That feeling came back, like I was being watched. I scanned the woods, but all I saw were trees and shadows. Nothing that made sense. I kept running, my steps quickening without me really meaning to. When I finally made it back to my street, the sun was just breaking the horizon, painting the sky pink and orange. I stopped and checked my watch again. The time matched the sunrise, but I still had this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right, like the world had tilted just a little and I'd slipped through a crack. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say? Hey, 12 minutes just vanished when I was running? It sounded crazy even to me. That day, I couldn't focus. I kept catching myself staring at my wrist or looking toward the trees near that clearing. When night came, I stayed inside, doors locked, windows shut tight. I told myself it was just a weird glitch, or maybe I zoned out without realizing it. But every time I go back running, I avoid that clearing. The last thing I want is to lose more time I can't explain, or to see whatever it was that moved in the trees that morning. I'm not sure what I ran into that day. Maybe it was nothing but a trick of the mind. Still, it's the kind of thing that sticks with you, like a shadow on your shoulder you can't quite shake off. Me and a couple of buddies decided to head out to Enchanted Rock for a weekend camping trip. It was early spring, probably the end of March, and we figured the weather'd be decent, not too hot yet, and the stars out there are supposed to be something else. I'm Jeremy Mills, been living in Austin all my life, so getting out to the hill country like that felt good, away from the city buzz. We got there just before sundown, set up camp in one of the spots a little off the main loop. It was a quiet spot, tucked behind some scrub oak and juniper, just enough trees to block some wind, but open enough to see the rock itself glowing pink in the fading light. We cooked some burgers over the fire, cracked open a few beers, just shooting the breeze like usual. The night was calm, the kind where the air's a little cool but not biting, and the sky was full of stars. After we'd eaten and the fire had burned down a bit, we sat around the flames swapping stories. I remember looking up and noticing the Milky Way stretched out like a white ribbon across the sky. It was peaceful, real peaceful. Around midnight, though, that quiet started to feel different. We'd all been pretty mellow, maybe getting ready to turn in soon when I caught this sound. At first, I thought it was some animal, like a raccoon or something knocking around in the brush. But it wasn't right. It was this strange rhythmic clicking. Not fast like a woodpecker, but slow and deliberate, almost mechanical. I nudged my buddy, Mark, and asked if he heard it. He stopped talking and nodded. We all listened, and yeah, that clicking kept going on and off, like it was coming from somewhere just beyond the tree line, maybe a couple hundred yards out. My other friend, Carlos, grabbed his flashlight and said, "Let's check it out. See if it's just some critter or maybe a piece of gear left behind." The rest of us hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay near the fire, but the curiosity won out. We grabbed a couple more flashlights and started walking toward where the sound seemed strongest. The woods out there at night felt different. The trees closed in more than I remembered from the daytime, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my stomach tighten a little. The clicking stopped as soon as we stepped out of the clearing. We kept moving, shining our beams around, but nothing obvious showed up. After about 10 minutes, the sound started again, faint this time, just a few clicks, almost like a pattern. We followed it slowly, trying not to spook whatever was making it. Then we found something. On the dirt, just off the trail, were faint impressions in the ground. They were triangular, three-sided shapes, about the size of my hand. The edges were clean but shallow, like someone had pressed something flat and pointy into the soil. The pattern repeated several times, spaced evenly as if they'd been left by footsteps, but there was no sign of footprints or tire tracks near them. No marks to show how they got there. I shone my flashlight over the ground, and Carlos knelt down, brushing away some loose dirt. "That's weird," he said quietly. "Like maybe some kind of equipment left prints, but I can't figure out what." Mark started joking. "Maybe it's those alien tripods from the old sci-fi movies." We all laughed, but there was this quiet edge to the joke, like none of us really believed it, but also none of us wanted to say it outright. We kept walking, looking for more signs, but the impressions stopped after a while. The clicking sounds didn't come back, at least not while we stayed out there. Still, the air felt heavier, like something was just beyond the trees watching us, waiting. We headed back to camp, and I remember feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up a few times, especially when the flashlights caught shadows that didn't match anything we saw. Back at the fire, none of us really talked much about it. We all just sat quiet, staring into the flames. The night sounds louder now, with the animals and insects filling the silence. The rock looked enormous in the moonlight, almost like it was watching over us. I tried to shake off the feeling, told myself it was just an overactive imagination after a few beers in the late hour, but I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing that clicking sound, slow and steady like a clock ticking somewhere just out of reach. The next morning, the impressions were still there, faint in the dirt. I took a picture with my phone, but looking back, it barely shows up. We packed up and left soon after, the morning sun warming the rocks and trees, making everything look normal again. On the drive home, the woods looked the same as always, the highway familiar and empty. But that night stuck with me. Something about those quiet sounds and strange marks, like a subtle message left behind for no one to find. I haven't been back out there since. Sometimes when I'm driving past Llano or heading up 16, I think about that night and wonder if whatever it was is still out there, clicking away in the dark. My name's Jacob Merrill. I live out near Lago Vista on the north shore of Lake Travis. Most evenings after dinner, I take my dog Scout down by the water. It's quiet that time of day, just a couple fishermen packing up, maybe a boat or two heading in before dark. That night, I remember the air being still. Not just calm, still. The kind of still where you can hear Scout's collar jingle 100 feet away, and the crunch of my boots on gravel sounds too loud. There was no wind, no bugs buzzing. Even the lake looked flat, like poured glass. We took the usual path, down the narrow dirt trail behind the RV park, through the cedar trees, and out to the little rocky spit that juts into the water. Scout likes to nose around there, smell the fish guts left by whoever cleaned their catch earlier in the day. I was watching him sniff at something when I noticed the surface of the lake shift. At first, I thought it was just a fish jumping, but the ripples weren't right. They were coming from dead center out in front of me, maybe 40 yards away. Perfect circles, evenly spaced, moving outward across the water. Not the random, messy kind you get from a fish or a tossed rock. These were exact, like someone had dropped a stone in the middle, except nothing had. And they kept coming, over and over. I crouched, squinting, trying to see if maybe there was a turtle poking its head up or a submerged log moving. Nothing. The circles just kept rolling out, perfectly spaced, the center point never shifting. Scout didn't like it. He froze, tail low, and gave one short bark. Then he stared straight out over the ripples, ears forward. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw the light. It was small, not much bigger than a bright star, but it wasn't in the sky exactly. It was hanging maybe 20 or 30 feet above the lake, right over where the ripples were starting. No sound, no movement, no reflection on the water. It just floated there. I glanced around thinking maybe it was a drone, but it didn't have that flickering or wobbling drones usually do. And I couldn't hear anything, no hum blades. I stood there staring for what felt like a long time. Could have been a minute, could have been 5. The light didn't change. Then without warning, it just blinked out. Not like it drifted away or dimmed. It was there and then it wasn't. The ripples stopped too, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The lake went flat again. I felt this weird heaviness in my chest, like when you realize you've been holding your breath too long. Scout whined. I decided we were heading back. The trail home felt different. The cedars seemed thicker, the air heavier. About halfway up the path, Scout stopped dead. He was facing back toward the water, hackles raised, growling low. I listened, but didn't hear anything. The quiet was back, and it was almost worse than the light had been. When we finally stepped out of the trees near the RV park, I noticed something strange. The porch light on the first trailer, one that's always on, was dark. I looked around. Every single light along the row was out. The only glow came from the distant marina across the cove. By the time we reached my place, the power was back, or at least it seemed that way. Lights on, TV still playing. I checked the clock. It said 8:14. I'd left the house at 7:30, and the walk down to the lake and back takes maybe 20 minutes if Scout's slow. But for some reason, I felt like I'd been gone a lot longer. I tried not to dwell on it. Poured myself a beer, fed Scout, sat down. But about 15 minutes later, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Scout wouldn't go near the back door. He was curled on the couch, staring at it like someone was standing just outside. I pulled the curtain back. Nothing there, just the dark yard and the faint outline of the lake in the distance. The next evening, I told myself I was being stupid, but I still didn't take the trail. We just walked the main road. Even from up there, I could see that spot on the lake. Smooth, still, too still. A couple nights later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back down. This time, there was wind, the water choppy, the usual cricket noise in the background. Everything felt normal until I reached the spit. The second I stepped out of the trees, the wind stopped. Dead calm again. I stood there, heart going, scanning the water. And damned if I didn't see those perfect ripples start up in the same place as before, spreading out slow and even. I felt every instinct telling me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I kept waiting for that light, but it never came. Just those endless circles on the water, like something under there was breathing in a way I couldn't see. I finally backed away, keeping my eyes on the spot until the cedars blocked the view. Scout didn't make a sound that time, just stayed close, ears twitching like he was hearing something I couldn't. I haven't gone down there since. But every now and then when the air's real still, I swear I can see faint rings on the surface from my deck, even when the rest of the lake's flat. My name's Kyle Ramirez. I run a small cattle operation on the edge of Llano County, just east of Castell. Not a big spread, maybe 80 acres, mostly open pasture with a few stands of live oak and mesquite. Been here my whole life, and in all those years I'd never seen anything I couldn't put down to weather, critters, or someone being careless. One morning last April, I walked out to check the west pasture before the heat set in. Sun was just high enough to burn the dew off, air already getting that warm, still feel it gets before noon. I took the Polaris down the fence line, mostly looking for signs the calves had been slipping under. They'd done it twice that month. About halfway across the pasture, I saw something that didn't sit right. From a distance, it looked like a darker patch in the grass, maybe a burned spot from a lightning strike. But we hadn't had any storms in weeks. As I got closer, I slowed the ATV and just stared. It was a perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, burned into the ground. Not charred black, but that deep reddish-brown color where the grass had been cooked right down to the dirt. The edges were razor clean, like it had been cut with a giant stencil. I stepped off the ATV and walked around it. That's when I realized the weirdest part. The very center of the circle still had tall, healthy grass, green as anything. It wasn't just a ring of burned grass, it was a ring with an untouched center. I crouched down and ran my hand over the scorched part. It was dry, brittle, and smelled faintly like singed hay. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of anyone walking through. The soil underneath was warm. Not hot enough to burn me, but noticeably warmer than the ground outside the ring. The grass at the center, I can't explain it. I stepped inside, half expecting it to be cooler or maybe damp. Instead, it was just normal. Cool morning grass, no smell of smoke, no sign it had been disturbed. I dug my heel into the dirt, soft like any other spot. I spent a good half hour walking around that thing, checking every angle. The fence line was 100 yards off, no sign anyone had come through it. No trails, no bent wire. It was like it had just appeared there. That night, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Jim, over a beer. He just shrugged and said maybe some kids had built a fire and covered it up, but I told him there was no ash, no wood, nothing. Plus, a perfect ring, and the middle untouched, didn't add up. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on it. The scorched grass didn't crumble away like I figured it would. It stayed in place, stiff and dry. The center stayed green. My cattle avoided it completely. I'd watch them graze right up to the edge, then turn away. Not one hoofprint inside. About a week later, I went out early just before dawn, hoping to see if maybe some critter was causing it. As I crested the little hill overlooking the west pasture, I saw a glow, faint, bluish, right where the ring was. It wasn't bright enough to light the surrounding grass, just sitting there, low to the ground. I killed the ATV and stood there watching. The glow pulsed, not fast, just a slow rhythm like breathing. I couldn't see a source. No sparks, no flames, no movement. After maybe 30 seconds, it faded until the ring looked normal again. I walked down, but by the time I got there, everything was still. The scorched part was still warmer than the rest of the field, even though the sun hadn't come up yet. That night, around midnight, my dogs started barking like they do when deer get too close to the yard. I stepped out with a flashlight and scanned the field. Couldn't see anything moving, but I swear I heard a low humming, almost like a distant generator. Problem was, it was coming from the direction of the ring, and there's nothing out there but grass. The sound stopped when I hit the fence line. No wind, no bugs, just quiet. I stood there longer than I meant to, feeling like something was just past where the flashlight could reach. Eventually, I went back inside, but I didn't sleep much. By the third week, the ring started to change. The scorched grass didn't grow back, but the dirt under it cracked like it had been baked for months. The center stayed green, but the grass there got taller, thicker than the rest of the field, almost like it was growing faster. One morning, I noticed something else. The circle wasn't exactly where it had been. It had shifted maybe 2 feet to the east. Same size, same shape, but the old burned ring was now just dead grass, and the new one was fresh, warm to the touch. I can't figure out how I missed it happening. After that, I started hearing things at night more often. Not the humming this time, but soft, quick sounds like footsteps in grass. Always too far to see, but close enough I'd stop whatever I was doing and listen. The dogs would pace the yard, staring out toward the west pasture, ears flat. Last time I went out there after dark, I didn't make it all the way. I was halfway across when I saw movement. Not a person, not an animal, just a shadow that didn't match anything else. It slid across the grass, stopped right at the edge of the ring, and then it was gone. I turned around and went back to the house without checking further. A few days later, I woke up early, just before sunrise, and looked out from the porch. The ring was gone. Grass all the way across, no scorch, no green center. If I didn't know better, I'd say it had never been there. I walked out anyway. The grass where it had been was damp with dew, but the soil underneath was still warm. There was one other thing. Just at the very center, tucked low in the blades, was a small stone, smooth, almost perfectly round, pale gray like river rock. I don't have any rocks like that on my property. It's sitting in my barn now on a shelf, and I'm not sure why I haven't thrown it out. The cattle are grazing there again like nothing happened, but every so often I'll walk past the barn, and for just a second, I could swear I hear that low hum again. My name's Ryan Garza. I grew up in Midland, so I've been out to the Davis Mountains more times than I can count. Mostly for stargazing or just at the flat nothing for a while. This happened 2 summers ago, late July, when I took my wife Marlene and our 2 kids camping out near Fort Davis. We'd picked a spot a couple miles off the main road, not far from one of those big bouldered hills. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing we'd found before on a hiking trip. I'd parked the truck off the dirt trail and we set up the tents while the kids chased each other around, stirring up dust. The first day was normal, hot in the afternoon, cool in the evening. We grilled some fajitas over the campfire and watched the sky turn that crazy purple you only get out there. Around 9, the stars came out sharp as nails. That's half the reason we go. No light pollution, just the whole Milky Way right overhead. By 10, the kids were in their sleeping bags, out cold. Marlene and I sat by the fire, sipping from the flask I'd brought. It was quiet except for the crickets and the occasional distant yip of a coyote. You can hear forever out there. The air feels huge. It must have been close to midnight when I first noticed it. This low, steady sound, like a generator running far away. Not a plane, not a truck. It didn't waver or pulse, just this deep hum you could almost feel in your chest. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from some ranch equipment, but there weren't any ranches close enough for it to carry like that. Marlene heard it too. She gave me this look, like, "You hearing that?" I nodded, poked the fire a bit, trying not to make a big deal out of it. The sound wasn't moving, exactly, but it was getting thicker. That's the only way I can put it. Like it was pressing down on us. I leaned back in my chair to scan the sky. It was still bright with stars, the Big Dipper clear as day. But then, real slow, something changed. I couldn't see it at first, but the stars in one section of the sky seemed to vanish. Not all at once, just a few, then a few more, until there was this big starless patch overhead. It took a second to realize I was looking at something. Not a cloud. There weren't any clouds that night. This was darker than the sky, if that makes sense. A shape. Huge. No lights, no outline I could trace, just this absence of stars sliding over us. The hum got heavier as it passed right above. Marlene grabbed my arm, not hard, but she didn't let go. The kids were still asleep. I thought about waking them, but didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want them to see it. It moved so slow, I couldn't tell if it was even moving at all at first. No breeze, no change in the air except that pressure in my ears. I remember swallowing, trying to pop them like when you drive up to Cloudcroft, but it didn't work. The shape, whatever it was, covered the stars for what felt like a full minute. Long enough for my eyes to start playing tricks. I thought I saw faint edges, maybe curved, maybe flat. I thought I saw parts of it shimmer, like heat waves over asphalt. Then the hum shifted down a tone, almost like it was farther away, and the stars began to reappear behind it. When it was gone, the sound faded too until all we could hear again were the crickets. I realized my hands were sweaty, even though the night had cooled off. Marlene didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. We sat there, staring at the patch of sky where it had been. I kept trying to think of something normal it could have been. A low-flying cargo plane, some kind of blimp, maybe even a weird temperature inversion making a sound bounce funny. But none of that fit. No plane that size could move that slow without stalling, and blimps don't fly out here in the middle of the night with their lights off. A little while later, I decided to walk a bit away from the fire to see if I could hear it again. I didn't, but I did notice something odd. The dirt under my boots felt softer. Not everywhere, just in a rough oval about 30 feet across, maybe 50 yards from our tents. It wasn't wet, but it gave under my weight like it had been loosened. I knelt down and sifted some through my fingers. The top layer was warm, not warm from the day's heat, This was different. I stood there listening hard, half expecting the hum to come back. Nothing. No coyotes anymore either. Just the fire popping behind me. I didn't mention the warm dirt to Marlene. She was already on edge, and I didn't want to make the night worse. We sat up another half hour, then crawled into the tent. I kept my boots by the door, just in case. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke up to silence so complete it felt wrong. Even the bugs had shut up. Marlene was breathing slow beside me. I didn't hear the kids. I eased the zipper open just enough to peek out. The sky was normal again, full of stars. But the clearing felt empty, like the air had been scooped out. I stayed like that, half sitting, for maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard it, way off in the distance this time, the same low hum, fading even as I caught it. It didn't come back. By morning, everything looked ordinary. The soft patch of dirt had cooled, but was still looser than the rest. I kicked some dust over it and packed up our stuff. Marlene didn't bring up the noise or the missing stars until we were already halfway back to Midland. When she did, it was just one sentence. "You saw it too, right?" I told her yes. That was all we said about it. Name's Cole Warren. I run a few hundred acres west of Marfa, out past where the pavement ends and the dirt just keeps going. Most nights out here are dead quiet, except for coyotes yapping and the occasional truck on 90. I've lived in this stretch of desert my whole life, so I know what belongs in the sky and what don't. This was late October last year. I'd been out checking a section of fence along the north pasture earlier in the evening. About 10 o'clock, I was in the house nursing a cup of coffee when I heard this odd bellow carry across the fields. Not panicked exactly, but deep and long, like one of my steers was calling out to no one. The sound had that hollow ring to it you get on cold, still nights. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and old Winchester, just in case it was a coyote pack circling. It's about a quarter-mile walk to that north lot, and the moon was just a thin sliver, so the stars were throwing all the light. I could see the fences and mesquite in sharp outlines. No wind, no bugs, just my boots on the dirt and the crunch of old grass. About halfway there, I caught sight of something standing alone near the far fence line, one of my Angus, frozen stock still. Even from a distance, I could tell something was off. Cattle will stand still plenty, but they don't lock up like that unless something's really got their attention. I kept walking, and that's when I noticed the glow. Faint at first, like heat lightning way off on the horizon, except it wasn't in the distance. It was hanging maybe 30 feet above the steer, round, about the size of a beach ball, but not solid. More like it was made of light that pulsed slow, soft white fading to pale orange, then back again. It didn't throw shadows or light the ground much, just sat there, almost weightless. I stopped dead. I've seen the Marfa lights plenty over the years, like from a good long ways away on the viewing platform, but never anything like this hovering over my own land. I don't mind saying my mouth went dry right there. The steer didn't move, didn't blink, just stared straight up at it, muscles stiff under his hide. I swear I could see his breath hanging in the cold air, but it wasn't drifting. It just sort of lingered, like the air around him was heavier somehow. I took a slow step forward, then another. My flashlight beam looked useless compared to the glow above him. When I was maybe 50 yards out, the orb shifted. Not fast, not like it was startled, just floated sideways, smooth as if someone was reeling it in on an invisible string. It moved out over the fence and into the pasture beyond, getting dimmer the farther it went. The second it cleared the steer, he let out a short grunt and bolted for the herd like he'd just been let go from a pen. I turned my light on him and saw the hair along his spine standing straight up. I crossed the fence and tried following the glow, but after about 30 more yards it just faded until I couldn't tell if I was still seeing it or imagining the last trace of it. I stood there in the middle of the pasture, rifle hanging in one hand, trying to listen for anything, coyotes, wind, even a truck out on the highway. Nothing. The silence was so deep it felt like my ears were ringing. I finally headed back toward the north lot to check the steer. Found him pressed in close to the rest of the herd, head low, tail flicking. When I got within a few feet, he shied away like I'd spooked him bad. That's not normal for my cattle. They know me. I did a quick scan of the fence line where I'd first seen him. No breaks, no fresh prints except my own. I swept the flashlight across the ground where the orb had been. Nothing. No scorch marks, no trampled grass, no sign anything had touched down. By the time I got back to the house, it was past midnight. I poured another coffee, sat down by the kitchen window, and just watched the dark out over that pasture. Around 1:30, I spotted movement. Not the orb, but a pinpoint of light way out past the north fence, bobbing low like someone walking with a lantern. It moved slow for maybe a minute, then just blinked out. The next morning, I saddled up early and rode out that way. Couldn't find a single track. Not boot prints, not hoof marks, nothing. Ground was undisturbed. For the rest of that week, I checked that north lot every evening. The cattle stayed bunched tighter than usual, even when grazing. Twice I caught them all turning their heads in unison toward the same spot on the horizon, but I never saw anything there. On the third night, just before sunrise, I was out by the barn when I noticed the same steers standing apart again, rigid, staring at the sky. My gut went cold. I looked up, scanning for the glow, but the sky was empty. Just a thin smear of stars fading in the dawn. That steer still won't let me within 10 feet without shying off. Name's Ray Mendoza. I've been working overnight security at a warehouse on the east side of Dallas for a couple years now. It's the kind of job where you mostly keep to yourself, making sure no one sneaks in, checking doors and windows, and dealing with the occasional stray cat or raccoon. Nothing fancy, just long hours of quiet and watching. One night, about 3 months back, I was doing my usual rounds around 2 a.m. The warehouse is this big, plain metal building, nothing special. Just a couple rows of those motion-activated floodlights around the perimeter. I'd been out there before when things got quiet, but this time, something was off. I was walking along the west side, flashlight in one hand, keys jangling in the other, and I started hearing this low, constant buzzing. It wasn't like any insect I've ever heard around here, not like cicadas or those damn mosquitoes. This was smooth, steady, almost mechanical, but faint, like a hum you could feel more than hear. It wasn't coming from the ground or anything close, it was above me. I looked up toward the roof. The sky was clear, no clouds, and the city lights made it easy enough to see. Then I caught something out of the corner of my eye, a shape, low and gliding just above the building's roofline. I couldn't make out much at first, just a dark silhouette reflecting some of the city's orange glow. It was smooth, kind of flat on the bottom, like it was skimming the air, maybe a few dozen feet above the rooftop. I swear, it was moving slow, like it was cruising, just keeping pace with me as I walked. What was weird was none of the motion-activated lights came on. I'd walked past those lights 1,000 times, and anytime you move near one, it flips on right away, flooding the area with bright white light. Not this time. Nothing. It was like the thing's presence was somehow messing with the sensors. I stopped, shining my flashlight up toward the shape. It didn't make any noise beyond that low buzz. No engines or rotors or anything I could recognize. The air was still except for that sound. I called out, "Hey, what the hell you doing up there?" But got no answer, just the buzzing humming. I wanted to get closer, maybe see if I could spot someone on top of the roof, or maybe a drone or something. But as I moved toward the building's side entrance, the shape suddenly shifted. It was like it noticed me for the first time. Slow and smooth, sliding sideways out of my line of sight. I turned fast to follow, but it was gone. That's when the lights flickered on. Just a couple of them, probably triggered by a sensor on another side of the building. I checked my phone to see the time, 2:17 a.m., and took a quick picture just to have something. The photo looked normal at first, just the dark sky and warehouse silhouette. But when I zoomed in, there was this faint, blurry outline in the sky where I'd seen the shape. Nothing solid, more like a shadow with a faint shimmer. I kept my rounds, but the buzzing stayed low in the background, almost like it was following me. Every time I got near a light, it refused to turn on until I stepped far away. The whole situation was making my skin crawl. Later, when I got to the front gate to finish my check, I heard something else, a soft tapping sound on the metal fence near the guard shack. I swung my flashlight toward it, but nothing was there. The dogs in the nearby neighborhood started barking, way louder than usual. I finished my shift, drove home, and told Jess about it the next morning over breakfast. She gave me that look, half concerned, half like I'd been watching too many late-night conspiracy shows. But I'm not one for stories or tall tales. I just know what I heard and saw that night. Since then, I've noticed other little things. My radio cutting out for a second here or there, lights in my house flickering oddly. Nothing huge, but enough to make me check over my shoulder now and then. I still work that overnight shift, but I don't walk the roof line anymore. If whatever it was comes back, I hope it keeps its distance. All I know is that night, something was there, just above me, silent but watching, and it didn't want to be seen. Name's Jesse McLean. I work the night shift at a gas station just off Highway 287, about 10 miles south of Wichita Falls. Nothing fancy about the place, just a couple of pumps, a little convenience store with snacks and sodas, and me behind the counter from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. Quiet nights, mostly, except for the odd trucker or late-night driver stopping for gas. That particular night, I was wiping down the counter, bored as usual. It was one of those dry, cool spring evenings. Not cold enough for a jacket, but the kind of breeze that reminds you summer's a ways off. The fluorescent lights inside flickered now and then, probably on their last legs. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a beat-up pickup parked near the far pump. I was glancing outside every so often, more to pass time than anything. The sky was clear, the stars scattered, and that's when I noticed it. A steady beam of pale light shining down over a field about a quarter mile to the east. It wasn't like a streetlight or anything familiar. It was too sharp, too steady, like someone was holding a flashlight pointed straight down. The light was a cool white, almost bluish, and it cut through the darkness like a spotlight. I'm no stranger to strange things out here. This part of Texas has its share of weird tales. But this was different. The light didn't move or flicker. It just stayed there, shining on the empty field like it was looking for something. Curious, I stepped outside and stood by the pumps, trying to get a better look. The field was just open land, patches of dry grass and wildflowers, nothing worth shining a light on in the middle of the night. I wondered if maybe it was someone's truck or farm equipment, but there weren't any vehicles nearby. About then, old Hank, the farmer from down the road, pulled up in his rusty Chevy. I recognized him right away. Been around these parts all his life. He nodded to me from his truck window, looking toward the light with a mix of curiosity and unease. "What in tarnation's that?" he muttered, stepping out of his truck. "I'm heading over to see if someone's hurt or needs help." I nodded. "Yeah, I'm watching it too. Doesn't seem normal." Hank grabbed his hat, adjusted it, and walked toward the edge of the field. I could see him silhouetted against the pale light, moving slowly. I stayed by the pumps, watching, trying to keep calm. Then, just as Hank got near the brightest part of the beam, the light vanished. Poof. Like someone flipped a switch. 1 second, the field was bathed in that eerie glow. The next, it was pitch black, except for the stars. Hank stopped, spun around, and waved his hands in the air like he was trying to get a grip on what he'd just seen. He looked at me, his face tight with confusion. Nothing there. Ain't a thing in that field but grass and dirt. I didn't say much. I was wondering the same thing. For a moment, the night felt heavier, quieter. The usual sounds of cicadas and frogs seemed to fade out, like the world held its breath. Hank climbed back into his truck and started it up, but he didn't drive away right away. He looked back at the field like he expected something else to show up. When he finally pulled back onto the road, I noticed his headlights flickered for a moment before settling steady. The rest of my shift, I kept looking out toward that field, but the light never came back. No movement, no sound beyond the usual night critters. I didn't tell anyone much about it. Most folks here would probably say it was just some equipment or light reflection, and I get that. But the way that light held steady, the way it disappeared right when Hank got close, something about it didn't add up. I still think about it some nights, standing out here under the stars, wondering if anyone else saw it, or if it was just me and Hank and a field that held a secret we couldn't quite touch. We were sitting on the tailgate with a couple of cold beers and the radio turned down low, the kind of slow June night where the pines smelled like sap and the moon hung over the highway like somebody left a light on. My name's Jesse Carter, and Becky and I had driven out past Old Bullard Road to the little clearing behind my sister's place. No streetlights, just sky and the glow from Tyler in the far distance. Roscoe, our black lab, nosed between us for a scratch behind the ear, then lay down like he always did, chest rising and falling steady as the radio's soft hum. We'd been watching Persides for the last hour, pointing out streaks, making lame bets about whose wish would hit. And neither of us saw the odd things until they started piling up like somebody rearranging the night. First, Roscoe stood up and put his paws on the tailgate and stared straight up, completely still. I'd heard him bark at deer and mailmen and the neighbors' kids. This wasn't like that. He wasn't whining. He wasn't sniffing. He was fixated, ears pinched forward. Becky nudged me and said, "You see that?" I followed her line of sight. There was nothing but stars, the moon, and the slow drift of clouds. Then the porch light on the farmhouse 2 lots over, on a place that never left a light on, blinked twice and went out as if someone had thumbed a switch. Roscoe started to bark. Low at first, then hard and continuous, like a thing trying to tell us not to breathe. We told him to hush. Becky raised her hand to shush him the way you do for an excited pup, but he didn't stop. He kept barking straight up in the same rhythm, all teeth and sound, until our voices dwindled and we stopped themselves. The noise around us, the cicadas, a faraway pickup, fell away like the world had put up a hand and said, "Listen." Then the radio stuttered. Not static, but a soft ripple like someone tuning between stations. Becky's phone, lying in the grass, flicked its screen on and flashed the lock screen time for 3 seconds, then went black again. Both of us looked at it like it might be a prank. The truck's dome light came on of its own accord, just for a second, then died. I climbed down off the tailgate and walked slow toward where Roscoe was staring. The hair on my arms felt thick, as if the humidity had turned to something physical. And when the thing showed up, it had no lights to announce itself. It was a dark triangle, no blinking beacons, no colored navigation lamps. Sliding between the stars like someone had cut a hole in the sky and tucked something behind it. It was big enough that when it went over, you could tell the stars near its edges were gone instead of obscured, like it wasn't in front of them but had moved them. I remember thinking how wrong that felt, the way your hand feels when you put it in a cool bucket by mistake. It moved slow, no sound at all. No engine noise, no wind change, nothing. The only sound was Roscoe's barking and our breathing and the whir of the distant highway. The triangle had crisp edges. It wasn't a cloud or a bird. It was a silhouette with angles that made the moonlight look softer around it. Becky and I both reached for each other at the same time and then stopped, because instinct didn't have a plan. Roscoe barked the whole time it crossed our patch of sky, non-stop, full-throated, the kind of barking that would usually bring every hound within a mile. For me, that was more unsettling than the dark thing. He didn't look scared in the way dogs show fear, whites of his eyes, tucked tail. He looked like he'd been given a job he couldn't refuse. Becky tried to call him, voice thin and useless, and he ignored her. The sound pressed at my ears until I felt a soft ache in the bones behind them. Something else I can't explain. When the triangle glided over, our little patch of clearing went a shade cooler, like someone had closed a door between us and the night. The smell of sap stilled. The moths that had been shimmying around the truck's paint vanished. For those 30 or so seconds it crossed, I had the sense that every living thing in the meadow had tightened its attention to that black shape. It showed no lights. It made no sound. It left no wake. It simply moved, and the stars where it passed blinked in and out of place, like a bad projector. Then it kept going toward the east, where the pines thinned and the county road runs near the reservoir. Roscoe kept barking until it was a distant smudge, and then he stopped on the single note, as if somebody pulled the thread out of a sweater and everything unraveled. When it was gone, the ordinary things came back like a tide. The crickets picked up like nothing had happened. The porch light down the road came back on steady. Our radio returned to a late-night DJ talking about the weather. Roscoe nosed at Becky's hand and then at his collar, and Becky whispered, "Baby," "Come here." And he wagged and jumped up on the tailgate like he'd been called in for dinner. That small, abrupt change, barked to none, felt more unnerving than the shape itself. We drove home in a silence we both needed. The road lights were the same as always, and grandmother's place had its fence post lamp on, exactly where it's always been. I told myself it was some kind of aircraft. Maybe a crop duster out late with lights off, some pilot making bad calls. That didn't sit right because the triangle didn't glide like anything I've ever seen on the radar at the airport. It didn't have a navigation light or a red strobe light. When I told my buddy Mark about it the next day, he laughed, said maybe we'd been out too long and seen shapes in the sky from beer and the heat. I wanted to agree with him so bad. But there were other small things that hadn't matched up. The phone screen blinked, the dome light, Roscoe's barking, the porch light strobing. When I went back to the clearing the next morning, before noon, with a thermos and a baseball hat and pretense of checking the fence, I noticed the grass under the tailgate where we'd been sitting had been flattened, like someone had set a pallet on it. Not just crushed, but arranged, like the blades pointed in one direction. There weren't any tracks leading to it, and the soil under my boots was as dry as the rest of the field. Nobody had been out there with us. It was just the two of us and a dog who barked at the stars. We don't talk about it much, but Becky won't go out after dark without me now. Roscoe sleeps in the bed between us, and when I get up in the middle of the night, I find myself listening at the window to the pines. People around Tyler will tell you the most likely explanation: planes, satellites, drones, a meteor that looked funny, and maybe that's true. Maybe it was all those reports we hear from the tower about something dark moving against the sky. I keep thinking about the way Roscoe barked until the shape was gone. I keep thinking about the porch light 2 lots over burning out and then coming back like nothing had happened. I keep thinking about the stars blinking like somebody had messed with the projector. I don't have an answer, and I'm not the kind to hang fear on a stick, but when the night gets still and Becky's out on the porch hauling in clothes, I don't like that feeling that something could slide over the sky like it was nothing at all and that a dog could hear it before we did. I was working the graveyard shift at that little gas station just off Highway 90, about 15 miles outside Del Rio. Name's Jesse Ramirez, born and bred in these parts, so late nights at a place like that aren't exactly new to me. Usually it's just a handful of truckers and the odd local stopping in for snacks or a quick fill-up. But that night, well, something about it just felt different. I was halfway through my shift, around 2:30 a.m., when I first noticed it. From the window behind the counter, way out near the edge of the lot where the pumps weren't, was this black vehicle parked far away, just sitting there in the dark. No lights on, no engine running, just there. The lot's big and dusty, nothing fancy like those big city stations with bright LEDs everywhere. Just a couple pumps under a flickering canopy, the little building where I was, and then the open stretch leading out to the highway. This black vehicle wasn't close enough to be a customer, not even close to the pumps. It was just parked off to the side where no one usually stops. I figured maybe someone pulled over to rest or was casing the place. But something about the windows caught my eye. They weren't reflecting the usual street lamps or the little neon signs hanging inside. Instead, they had this faint glow, like the windows themselves were lit from them by some pale, bluish light. Not bright, just enough to look unnatural. I blinked a couple times, thinking maybe it was some weird trick from the streetlights or my tired eyes playing games on me. But every time I looked back, the glow was there, steady and eerie. I grabbed my phone and started watching the security cameras. The monitors were grainy, black and white mostly, but clear enough to see the vehicle sitting there. No headlights, no movement inside, no one getting in or out. I went outside to check the pumps in the lot. The night air was dry, a little dusty, just like usual. Crickets and the occasional call of a coyote in the distance. But the spot where the vehicle had been was empty. No tire marks, no footprints, nothing. I shrugged it off and went back inside, thinking maybe the cameras caught it pulling away without me seeing. But when I rewound the footage, it was strange. The vehicle was there 1 minute, and then just gone. No leaving, no pulling out. One frame it was there, the next it was like the camera missed it entirely. I checked all the other angles, but none of them caught any movement from the black car. No lights, no doors opening, no engine starting. It just disappeared. I sat back down, heart pounding a bit, trying to make sense of it. I wasn't spooked exactly, more confused. The rest of the night went quiet. No customers, no cars, just me and that weird, empty lot under the stars. When morning came and the sun started peeking over the horizon, I stepped outside again, looking toward where that car had been. The spot was just a patch of cracked dirt and gravel. Nothing out of place. I don't know if anyone else saw it. Maybe I was just tired or imagining things. But I keep thinking about those windows, the way they glowed like something that shouldn't be there. It's the kind of thing that sits in your head, you know? Like a shadow you can't quite catch, but can't shake either. I was out back of my place just outside Waco, lying on the hood of my old Ford pickup, staring up at the stars like I usually do when the night's clear. It was one of those nights where the air's cool but not cold, and the crickets and katydids are doing their usual racket, making it feel like everything's exactly as it should be out here in Texas. No big city lights messing with the sky, just the Milky Way stretched out like a river of fireflies. I had a six-pack of Lone Star beside me and a pair of binoculars, not because I'm any kind of astronomy buff, just because I like to look closer at the stars when they catch my eye. I don't remember what got me looking up that way exactly, but I spotted this small cluster of lights, real faint, just little dots blinking on and off. They were arranged in a perfect line, blinking in sequence like some kind of code, almost mechanical but too precise to be fireflies or bugs. It wasn't random at all. I watched that pattern blink on and off, back and forth, steady as clockwork. I kept thinking maybe it was some drone or airplane far off, but no sound, no movement. They didn't shift or drift across the sky, just stayed put, blinking in that same perfect rhythm. I pulled out my phone to try and get a picture, but the screen went black and wouldn't turn on. Strange, but I figured the battery must have died or something. Not a big deal. Then I blinked. Just a quick blink, and when I opened my eyes again, those blinking lights were gone. Just black sky where they'd been. Nothing else to replace them either. The sky was still clear, but somehow it felt heavier, quieter. The crickets stopped. The katydids shut up. No frogs, no owls, nothing. Total silence. Like the whole night had held its breath. I sat up and looked all around, thinking maybe I just lost track of where I was or something weird like that. But the trees, the fence line, the road down by the house, they were all there, same as before. The stars looked the same, except those blinking lights weren't anywhere. I glanced back at the spot in the sky, scanning with the binoculars again, but there was nothing. No glow, no flicker. I got a little nervous, not gonna lie. Something about the sudden quiet got under my skin. Usually you expect some night sounds out here, even if it's just a breeze in the mesquite. I shook it off, telling myself maybe it was just a weird trick of the eye, or maybe a plane with lights out of sync. But that silence didn't want to let go. It stuck with me, creeping up the back of my neck like I'd walked into the wrong part of town and didn't know how to get out. I headed inside to grab a flashlight and a jacket, thinking I might take a walk down the road to clear my head. The house felt too quiet too, and the usual hum of the fridge and clocks seemed distant. Outside, I walked down the gravel driveway, shining the beam into the brush. The trees and brush looked normal, but I noticed something else. No animals darting off, no eyes reflecting back in the light. Usually, when you shine a light out here at night, something moves or squeaks. Not that night. I kept walking toward the road, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched, but every time I stopped, the silence grew heavier. I told myself I was just tired, maybe a little spooked from working the week straight. When I got back to the truck, I checked my phone again, and it powered on like nothing had happened. The battery was fine, no glitches. I thought about calling someone, but what would I say? Hey, the bugs stopped singing and some lights blinked in a pattern then vanished? So I didn't call. I just sat there a while, listening to the silence. Eventually, the bugs started back up. Soft at first, soft then picking up their usual chorus. The night felt normal again, like the quiet had been a pause button and someone finally hit play. I went back inside, poured myself another beer, and stared out the window. The sky was full of stars, but I didn't see anything blinking like before. The whole thing felt like a strange, half-forgotten dream that wouldn't quite let me rest. Since then, I keep an eye on that same patch of sky, but it's been nothing but ordinary stars. I don't know what I saw that night, and maybe I don't want to know. It's just one of those things that happened, and it's still sitting out there somewhere in the dark. Name's Jesse Miller. I drive a delivery rig for a small outfit based out of Odessa. Most of the routes I cover run through the West Texas desert, long stretches of flat, empty land with nothing but scrub and the occasional mesquite tree. You get used to the silence out there, the way the horizon just goes on forever. But there was this one night that I keep coming back to in my head because it didn't fit any of that. It was late October, about 9 o'clock at night, and I was hauling a load from Midland down toward Fort Stockton. Nothing unusual at first, just me, the truck, and those endless miles of highway lit by my headlights and the stars. The radio was on low, some old country station playing, and the cab was quiet but comfortable. I remember it started with the dashboard flickering. I glanced down to check my speed. Lights dimmed, then all went dead. Just like that, the whole dash went black. The GPS, the radio, everything. The engine cut out too, like I'd hit the kill switch. I hit the ignition again, thinking maybe it was a glitch or I accidentally knocked a switch. The engine was dead silent, no turnover, no click. Just nothing. I was sitting there in the dark, staring out at the desert that looked darker than usual, even with the moon high above. Then I saw it. Out there in the distance, maybe a half mile from the highway, hovering just above the desert floor. It was a silver disc, smooth and flat, maybe the size of a small car. No lights blinking, no sound, nothing like a helicopter or drone. It was just there. Motionless. I swear, it was almost reflective, like it caught the moonlight in a way that made it shimmer faintly. But I couldn't make out any details. No windows, no seams, just a smooth shape hovering low, maybe 10 or 15 feet above the ground. I sat frozen, eyes glued to it. The truck was dead quiet, the engine off, the dash still dark. I wanted to reach for my phone, but my hands felt like lead. After what felt like a minute or two, the disc slowly began to lift, rising silently, then it just vanished. Gone, like it flicked off. Right then, everything in the truck suddenly powered back on. The dash lit up, the radio started crackling to life, and the engine roared back like nothing had happened. I blinked, heart pounding. I threw it into gear and didn't look back. The drive back into town was tense. I kept checking the rear view and side mirrors, half expecting to see that thing trailing me, but the road was empty, just the usual distant glow of oil rigs and wind turbines blinking along the horizon. At the station, I checked my truck, worried I'd find something wrong, but everything seemed fine. No weird marks, no signs of damage or tampering. Since then, I've driven that same route plenty of times, but never saw anything like that again. I keep telling myself it was a trick of the light or some kind of experimental aircraft, but I can't shake the way the dashboard died all at once, like something was messing with my rig. I don't know what it was, but I know what I saw. And I know how quiet it was. Too quiet. My name's Caleb Torres. I live out near Fredericksburg, deep in the hill country, where the land rolls soft and the sky stretches wide and open like nowhere else. I'm a carpenter by trade, but most nights I'm just a husband and dad trying to catch a little peace out on our property after the day's work is done. We've got a couple dogs, Ranger and Lulu, both part border collie, smart as anything, and usually pretty chill. This all started on a night last October. It was one of those evenings where the air smells crisp, almost like you can taste the coming winter, but the stars are still out in force, clear and bright with no clouds to spoil the view. My wife Jess had just finished tucking the kids in, and I was out back on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the dogs run around a bit before settling down. That's when I noticed both Ranger and Lulu just stopped dead in their tracks, sitting stiff like statues at the edge of the yard. Their ears perked up and they were staring straight up into the sky. Not barking, not growling, just completely still. That's not usual for them. If something's out there, they usually make a fuss. I called their names, but they didn't even glance back. Jess came out curious, and we both followed the dog's gaze. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual constellations twinkling overhead. Then slowly, right where the Big Dipper usually hangs, a faint shape started to take form. It was triangular, not sharply outlined, but a sort of shadowy outline against the stars. The edges weren't bright, just a soft, dark blur like something blocking the sky's glow behind it. It was moving slow, gliding eastward without a sound, without blinking or flashing like a plane or helicopter. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light or maybe a cloud, but it didn't behave like any cloud I've seen. It stayed the same shape and size, moving steady and slow, almost deliberate, like it was watching us back. Jess was quiet. The kids were asleep, so it was just the four of us and the dog still sitting perfectly still, eyes fixed on that dark shape. After a few minutes, Ranger let out a low whine, the first sound from the dog since we noticed it. Lulu got up and slowly backed toward the house, but Ranger just stayed, eyes locked on the sky. I grabbed my phone, but when I tried to take a picture, the camera just froze. Not a glitch I'm used to, it was like the phone was blocking the shot or something. I put it down, felt kinda uneasy holding it. The shape kept moving, steady and quiet, until it finally slipped behind a cluster of trees at the edge of our property, disappearing from view. After that, the dogs seemed normal again, wagging their tails and following me inside like nothing happened. Jess and I didn't say much at first. I kept looking back outside, hoping to catch another glimpse, but the sky was just stars and silence after that. That night, I lay awake wondering if I imagined it all. But the way the dogs acted told me otherwise. They're not fooled by shadows or tricks. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on the sky when I could. Nothing else showed up. No strange lights, no weird sounds. Just the usual quiet night and the slow, steady crickets. But every now and then, I'd catch Ranger staring off into the distance, ears up like he was waiting for something. I talked about it with a couple neighbors, but no one else saw anything that night. Just me, Jess, and our dogs, staring up at that faint, slow-moving shape. I still don't know what it was. It wasn't like anything I can explain. Just a dark triangle drifting against the stars, moving smooth and quiet, watched by dogs who seemed to know it wasn't normal. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, just beyond the tree line, watching us back. Name's Miguel Torres. I'm from El Paso, born and raised, but I spend most weekends out hiking in the Franklin Mountains. It's a decent stretch of desert wilderness right on the edge of town, and it's quiet out there, real quiet, especially at night. You can get lost in your own thoughts or just in the dark. This one night, a couple months ago, I was out on the North Loop Trail. I usually go with a buddy, but that evening he had to bail last minute, so it was just me, my pack, and my phone, mainly for navigation and a little music while I walked. I'm not the type to hike at night often, but I figured, what the hell? It's been hotter than hell during the day, and the cool night air felt better. Anyway, I was maybe a couple miles from the trailhead near the upper ridges when I noticed something weird on the horizon. There was this soft, glowing light way out over the desert flatlands. It wasn't like the orange glow of El Paso's city lights. This was a pale, steady kind of glow, almost bluish white, but soft like a lantern behind fog or something. It didn't blink or flicker. Just there, hanging low on the horizon. I stopped and pulled out my phone to check my compass, just out of habit. The thing was spinning like crazy, needle jerking all over the place. I swear it didn't settle on any direction, just spun like it was freaking out or magnetized to some strong force. I pointed the compass away from the glow, toward the hills behind me, and it settled down quick, like nothing was wrong. I looked back at that light. It didn't move. It just hovered there. I thought maybe it was some kind of flare or a distant vehicle, but it didn't flicker or move like a car or a plane. I'm telling you, it felt unnatural. The desert was dead silent, except for the soft rustle of mesquite trees in the wind. I took a few steps forward, trying to get a better look. The compass needle started spinning again as soon as I pointed it toward the light. It was like the light was messing with the electronics or something. I checked my GPS too. It kept losing signal or acting glitchy. That had me uneasy, but I kept moving closer anyway. About 10 minutes later, that glow just faded, like someone slowly dimmed a lamp. It wasn't sudden or abrupt, just gone. The desert looked darker all of a sudden. I checked my compass again. This time, it worked just fine, steady and calm, pointing true north like normal. I stood there for a few minutes trying to figure out what I just saw. No sound, no movement, no other lights, nothing. It felt like something was watching, but there was no one there. I decided it was time to head back. The walk down was quiet. My phone worked fine again, no glitches or compass freakouts. I kept glancing back toward where that glow had been, but there was nothing. Just dark desert. When I got home, I showed Jess the spot on the map and told her about the compass acting up. She laughed and said maybe I just needed new batteries or that my phone was bugging out. But I don't think so. Since then, I've been out a few more times, but I haven't seen anything like that again. Sometimes when I'm out late, I'll catch a glimpse of a faint light or feel like something's just beyond the edge of sight, but nothing that screws with my gear like that. I don't know what it was. Could have been something natural or maybe something else entirely. But whatever it was there that night, messing with my compass, watching from the horizon, quiet as the desert itself. Name's Jesse Martin. I'm from a little town just outside Conroe, Texas, and I've been fishing Lake Livingston since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. It's the kind of place where you know the water, the trees, and every bend in the shore like the back of your hand. Most nights, I'm out there with my old boat, a beat-up bass boat my granddad handed down, and just the sound of the water and crickets for company. That's how I like it. This story starts on one of those quiet late summer nights a few months back. I'd taken the boat out around 9 p.m., figuring the crappie might bite better under the moonlight. The lake was calm, not a ripple, besides what the boat made cutting through the water. The sky was clear, stars spilling everywhere, and the heat of the day had finally eased off to a cool Texas kind of night. I'd set up near an old cypress stand about a mile from the north shore, one of my favorite spots. I was sitting there, lines in the water, when I noticed something odd out in the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was a boat with a spotlight. There's always folks out there, sometimes fishing late like me. But no, this was different. There were two pale beams of light, parallel, shining straight down from the sky onto the water. They weren't bright or harsh, more like a soft glow that lit up patches of the lake surface, as moving slowly but deliberate-like. They swept side to side, scanning the water back and forth, like someone was looking for something. The beams stayed about the same distance apart, maybe 10 or 15 feet, and moved together perfectly in sync. I swear there wasn't a single sound besides the gentle slap of water on the hull. No boat engines, no motor hum, just those lights. At first, I thought maybe it was a plane with searchlights, but I scanned the sky and didn't see anything. No wings, no flashing navigation lights, nothing. The beams came from way up, so high that I couldn't tell if it was a helicopter or a plane or something else entirely. I grabbed my phone to take a picture, but when I opened the camera, the screen just froze. The phone wouldn't work for a good 30 seconds. Then it started back up, like nothing happened. I checked the photos. Nothing of the beams, like they never showed up at all. The lights kept moving slowly, scanning that patch of lake for what felt like maybe 5 minutes, then they began to fade. First one, then the other, until all that was left was the dark night and the water's quiet surface. I sat there, just staring. The whole thing didn't make sense. After a minute or two, I started the boat and headed back towards shore. But on the way, I felt like something was off, like I was being watched. Though every time I looked around, it was just the lake and trees. Back at the dock, my buddy Ray was waiting. I told him about the lights, but he just shook his head and laughed it off, said maybe it was a reflection from a plane or a truck on the highway. Could be. But I know what I saw, and it didn't fit any normal explanation. That night, when I got home, I checked the news, local social media, anything. No reports of strange lights or planes in the area. Nothing. Since then, I've thought about that night more than a few times. The way those beams moved so precise, like some kind of search. The silence around it all. The frozen phone camera. I don't know if I want to say I saw something out of this world, but I do know it wasn't just a normal light show. Some nights, when I'm out on the lake, I find myself looking up hoping to see those pale beams again. Maybe to figure out what they were looking for. But the lake keeps its secrets, and for now, so do I. Name's Jesse Morgan. Been working as a ranch hand out in Pecos County for near 5 years now, mostly with the Martinez place just off FM 11, about 20 miles east of Fort Stockton. It's the kind of place where the horizon just keeps going forever, and the wind whispers through the mesquite like it's got secrets it's trying to keep. I was out late one evening, just after sundown, finishing up some chores. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and the sky was a deep, empty blue, the stars just starting to peek out. I was heading back to the barn after checking the water troughs and gates, the kind of quiet night you'd expect out here. Nothing out of place but the usual coyotes howling off in the distance. My flashlight cut a narrow beam across the field ahead. That's when I heard it, my name. Soft, like a breath on the wind, just barely there. Jesse. I froze, listening close, but there was nothing else, just that one word carried on the breeze. I figured maybe I'd been talking to myself or caught the wind wrong, but the voice was clear, almost coaxing. I called out, "Who's there?" But all I got was the rustle of dry grass and the faint creak of the windmill turning slow. The place was dead quiet again. I started walking toward the sound, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then my flashlight caught something weird, right there, not 15 feet ahead, a glint, sharp and cold, reflecting like metal in the beam. I blinked, and it was gone. Just gone, like it had melted into the shadows. No sound, no movement, nothing. I spun around trying to catch a shape or a silhouette, but it wasn't a thing. There wasn't a thing. The night was thick with that kind of heavy silence that makes you want to keep moving. I called out again, more steady this time. "If you're messing with me, it ain't funny." That's when the light flickered in my hand. The flashlight, not a storm or anything, just started cutting out for a second, and then flickered back on. I stopped dead, my heart thumping harder. No power issues or batteries low. I checked that before heading out. Something about the air felt different, like the night had shifted around me. I told myself it was probably a trick of the light or my mind playing games after a long day. Figured I'd head back to the house and call it a night. But as I walked back, the whisper came again, just a little louder this time. "Jesse?" I stopped cold. The voice was close, but when I swung the flashlight around, all I saw were the tall mesquite trees and the shadows stretching like fingers. I don't know why, but I started heading back toward the barn slower, almost like I was being pulled, my eyes darting around, trying to catch whatever was making that sound. The whole field felt different, heavy, watched. Then, just before I got back, I caught a glimpse of that shiny glint again near the edge of the tree line. The same metallic flash, just for a split second. I raised the light and swept it carefully, but the field was empty. I stopped and just stood there, listening hard. The wind picked up, carrying the whisper one more time, clearer and closer, but still no shape, no one there. Finally, I shook it off, told myself I was tired and that was enough weird for one night. Walked back to the house, locked the door, and sat by the window for a while, watching the dark field out front. Whatever it was, it stayed quiet after that. I didn't hear my name again. But those little flashes, that soft call, they stuck with me. The next day, I checked the field, looked for tracks or anything strange. Nothing. Guess it's just one of those things that doesn't make sense. I'm not one to get spooked easy, but that night made me think twice about the quiet out here. Sometimes the land holds on to secrets better than folks do. I'm Wes Harper, born and raised out near Amarillo, Texas. I've been flying crop dusters for a good decade now, mostly out here over the Panhandle. It's a job that keeps me high above the flatlands, watching fields stretch out like a green and gold quilt beneath me. Nothing fancy, just the usual work during planting and spraying seasons. That morning started like any other. I got up just before dawn, brewed a strong pot of coffee, grabbed my gear, and headed out to the airstrip on the edge of town. The sky was clear, the air crisp but warming quick under that early sun. I was scheduled to spray a patch of wheat near Canyon, about 20 miles southwest of Amarillo. Not a complicated job, but it requires focus, especially flying low and steady, no sudden moves. I climbed into the cockpit, checked the duster's instruments, and taxied out. The runway's pretty short, so you've got to be precise with your takeoff. That day, everything felt normal as I lifted off and leveled out around 100 feet above the fields. The radio crackled occasionally with updates from Amarillo approach, mostly routine stuff. Weather reports, no other traffic expected in my area, and reminders about altitude restrictions. I usually keep it on, but don't say much. Just acknowledge and keep my eyes on the ground. About 30 minutes into the run, I was making my third pass over the wheat when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A quick flash, a glint in the sunlight below me. At first, I figured maybe a bird or a shiny piece of farm equipment reflecting light, but then it happened again, closer this time. I glanced down and saw something moving at a speed that didn't make any sense. A silvery oval shape, sleek and smooth, darting beneath me low over the field. It was too fast to be a vehicle, too low to be a plane, and it didn't make any sound. I swear, it passed right under the duster's belly in less than a second. I instinctively tightened my grip on the controls, heart rate picking up. The shape wasn't huge, maybe 10 or 15 feet long, but it was so shiny it looked like polished metal. No wings, no propellers, no exhaust or engine noise, just a blur of bright silver moving so fast it made my head spin. I tried to call Amarillo approach on the radio, my voice a little shaky. Amarillo approach, this is Dust 47. Do you copy? I just had an object pass underneath me at low altitude, no idea what it was, requesting any traffic info. Static. Then the calm voice came back. Dust 47, we have no other aircraft in your area. No traffic reported near your altitude or coordinates. Repeat, no known aircraft. That didn't help calm me down. I circled around the field a couple more times, trying to see if it would come back or if I could catch another glimpse. But nothing. The sky stayed empty, except for the wispy clouds on the horizon. I felt this creeping kind of quiet after that, like the whole world slowed down and the usual sounds, the engine humming, the wind outside, just got distant. It was eerie. When I landed, I told the folks at the hangar what happened, but most just laughed it off, saying maybe I'd seen a trick of the light or some drone out of sight. I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I kept replaying it in my head. The way that thing moved, no plane I'd ever seen or heard of could pull off something like that at that speed and altitude. It didn't behave like any bird or kite either. At night, I kept waking up thinking about it. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a faint glow outside the window or hear a weird hum on the wind, but every time I looked, nothing was there. I flew again the following week, same route, same time, but the sky was empty and the fields just lay quiet under the Texas sun. I haven't seen that silvery shape again, and I don't know what it was or what it wanted. Still, every time I'm up there over those wide open plains, I keep an eye out for something that doesn't belong and wonder if I'm the only one who ever did. My name's Tom Granger. I'm from a small town near Marathon, Texas. Real West Texas, where the horizon goes forever, and the sky at night is so big it feels like you could fall right into it. I'm used to long drives by myself or with my wife, Sarah. We do a lot of road trips out this way, just the two of us, trying to get away from city noise and all that. This one evening, we were heading back home after visiting some friends near Alpine. It was late summer, probably early September, and the sun had just dipped below the hills. We were cruising down Highway 285, that stretch that runs through all the empty land, nothing but mesquite and scrub brush on either side. It's the kind of road where you might go miles without seeing a car. Sarah was driving. I was sitting passenger side, half watching the highway and half staring out at the deepening dusk. There wasn't much traffic, just a few trucks that had passed earlier and maybe one or two cars coming the other way. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I noticed this light in the sky ahead, low above the horizon. At first I thought it was a plane. You see planes all the time, especially around here, either coming into Midland or going out to smaller airstrips. It was glowing steady, not blinking like an airplane usually does. It was way too low to be a star or planet, but the shape was off, hard to make out in the dim light. "Hey," I said to Sarah, pointing ahead. "You see that light up there?" She glanced over, then squinted. "Looks like a plane, maybe coming in low for the Marathon Airport?" "Yeah, maybe." I was watching it closely now. It was definitely moving, but not like a normal plane. It was descending slowly, like it was coming in for a landing. But the weird thing was, it wasn't making any noise. No engine hum or anything. Out here, in the quiet, you usually hear planes long before you see them. As we got closer, maybe a mile or so away, the light did something I wasn't expecting. Instead of continuing down or forward, it just stopped. Right there, in midair, like it hit a wall or something. "Did you see that?" I said. Sarah nodded, eyes wide. "It's just hanging there." Then it started to rotate. Slow at first, almost like it was inspecting the area. It didn't move up or down, didn't shift forward or back. Just spun around in place. We could see the shape clearer now, even though it was dark. It was oval, sort of disc-like, but without any wings or tail. The surface caught what little light was left from the sky, reflecting faint glimmers. I remember feeling my stomach knot up. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before, but I also wasn't ready to say what it was. Just knew it wasn't normal. Sarah slowed the truck a little, and we both just stared. The rotation kept going for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Time felt weird, stretched out. Then, just like that, it vanished. No engine noise, no acceleration, no flashing off into the distance. It was simply gone. One moment it was there spinning, the next it wasn't. Like someone hit an off switch. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was seeing things or it was some trick of the light. But Sarah was shaking her head, just as stunned. "Did it just disappear?" she asked. "Yeah, I don't know how." We both sat quiet for a bit, trying to process it. I kept glancing down the road, half expecting to see some kind of weird craft speeding away, but nothing. The highway was empty, the same as before. About a mile down the road, the radio came on. Static at first, then faint music. It had been dead since we started driving. The truck's dashboard lights flickered once, then went steady. I reached out and turned the radio up. It was some old country song, nothing strange, but it felt like something had reset. We drove on in silence, neither one really sure what to say. The desert around us was dark now, just the glow of distant stars overhead. The feeling wasn't one of fear exactly, more like being watched, or like something was just outside the edge of understanding. I kept wondering if we'd imagined the whole thing, but there were no words for that kind of light or that smooth rotation. The rest of the drive was uneventful, except I kept catching Sarah's eyes in the rearview mirror. We didn't talk much about it until the next day, and even then it was mostly just quiet acknowledgement. I've told some buddies about it, but no one really knows what to make of it. I'm not one for wild stories, but that night on 285 still feels like something was there. Something that didn't belong. We've driven that stretch plenty since and never seen a thing. But I keep my eyes on the sky a little longer now, just in case. I was down near Matagorda with my buddy Travis, fishing off one of those long rock jetties that stretch out into the Gulf. It was late April, warm enough that the air felt thick, and the water was just calm enough to see the faint ripples from mullet darting around the rocks. We'd been out there since before sunset, just soaking bait and drinking cheap beer. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned that deep purple where you can't tell exactly when day ends and night begins. We were talking low, mostly about fishing spots and Travis's truck that kept overheating, when I noticed something odd out past the jetty's end. It wasn't movement exactly, more like a dim glow under the water. At first I thought it might just be a school of jellyfish. The light was faint and kind of hazy, maybe 20 yards out, like somebody had dropped a lantern under the surface. I pointed it out to Travis, and we both watched as it seemed to slide slowly from left to right. Then another glow appeared right beside it. "Probably just bait fish getting stirred up," Travis muttered, but his voice didn't sound certain. The two glows kept moving, side by side, perfectly in line. Then a third one faded into view behind them. None of them blinked or shimmered like bioluminescence usually does. It was steady, like someone had stuck bulbs down there. And the weird part was, they were deep. Not surface shimmer. They were moving well below the chop, maybe 15 or 20 feet down, but bright enough we could see them clear. We just stood there watching. The lights moved in unison, a slow, steady path along the channel. Then they stopped completely. For a moment I thought maybe my eyes were tricking me, but Travis whispered, "They're lined up. 3 lights, perfectly spaced, just holding still under the water." The night had gone quiet. I didn't notice until then, but even the waves seemed softer, like everything was muffled. My line hung slack, untouched. Then, as if on some signal, the lights shifted again, this time in a wide, slow circle. The movement was so smooth it made my skin crawl. No hesitation, no little zigzags like a fish would make. We kept watching, not talking, until the lights faded out all at once. Just gone. The water was dark again, and the normal sounds seemed to creep back in. Waves slapping against the rocks, the faint hum of a shrimp boat's motor somewhere way out. We both kind of laughed it off, but neither of us turned our backs to the water. I reeled in and rebaited, but I was mostly going through the motions. That calm I usually get when I'm out fishing was gone. A couple minutes later, I heard this dull thump, like something big and heavy hitting metal coming from out past the jetty's tip. Travis froze mid-cast. We didn't see anything right away, but then the surface swelled up, not like a normal wave, but more like something pushing from underneath. That's when we saw it. A flat, metallic-looking shape broke the surface. It wasn't shiny, but the moonlight caught the edges enough to see it wasn't rock or driftwood. It was big, maybe the size of a small car, and completely smooth. No mast, no railing, nothing to grab onto visually. It rose up just enough for us to get a full look at it before it slid back under without a splash. The water closed over like it had never been disturbed. Travis let out a low, "What the hell?" but didn't finish the sentence. We stayed put for a while after that, scanning the water, expecting it to surface again. It never did. The whole time I kept feeling like we shouldn't be there, like we'd wandered too far into something we weren't supposed to see. We finally packed up when the tide shifted and the wind picked up. The walk back down the jetty felt longer than it had going out, and we didn't say much. When we hit the beach, Travis stopped and turned to look back toward the water. There was nothing but dark waves and the faint lights of the rigs way out in the Gulf. Still, I knew we were both thinking about those other lights, the ones under the water, moving like they were all part of the same thing. We loaded our gear into the truck without another word and headed inland. I remember glancing in the side mirror when we got to the highway. The Gulf was just a black line against the sky, but it felt like it was watching us go. I was hauling a load of pipe out to El Paso, running westbound on I-20, just past Midland. It was late, probably pushing close to 2 in the morning. That stretch out there is about as empty as Texas gets. Flat land, mesquite here and there, a wind that feels like it never quits. My CB was quiet, the road was quiet, and I was in that half-zone state where you're watching the white lines, but your mind's a couple hundred miles away. I remember I'd just passed a lit-up pump jack to my right, slow, nodding in the dark, when I saw something down low on the passenger side. At first I figured it was a reflection from my own marker lights bouncing off a road sign, or maybe a shiny hubcap on a passing car. But there wasn't a car. There wasn't anything. It was a sphere, small, maybe the size of a basketball, hovering about 2 feet off the ground, keeping perfect pace with me. I could see it clearly in the wash of my side lights, smooth, metallic, no seams, no markings. It wasn't spinning, just there, sliding along like it was on invisible rails. I slowed a bit, downshifting, thinking maybe it was some weird piece of debris caught in the wind. But it matched me exactly, no wobble, no sway. I sped back up. So did it. The wind out there was pushing hard from the south, but this thing didn't react to it at all. It didn't bob or drift. It was steady, almost unnaturally so. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I realized I was leaning way over, trying to see it better through the side window. After about a mile, I rolled my passenger window down, expecting to hear something. Maybe the wind catching a drone or the whine of some kind of motor. There was nothing, just the deep roar of my tires and the wind ripping past. I grabbed the CB mic and keyed up. Any westbound got a visual on something pacing me right shoulder side? I said. Static. No one answered. The road was dead, not a single pair of headlights ahead or behind. It was like the whole highway had emptied out just for me. A couple minutes later, I passed a small cluster of oil field service trucks parked off a dirt road. I remember hoping one of the guys might glance up from whatever they were doing and see this thing, but nobody moved. The sphere kept with me for maybe 5 miles. I watched the mile markers tick by, 124, 123, 122, all the while thinking about pulling over, but I didn't. The thought of that thing stopping right next to me while I was at a dead stop made my chest feel tight. Around marker 121, it drifted just slightly ahead of my cab. It was still hugging the edge of the pavement, moving perfectly smooth, not a hint of bounce. I realized my mouth was dry and that I'd been breathing shallow, like I didn't want to make a noise. Then, without any kind of build-up, it shot straight upward. No arc, no tilt, no acceleration curve, just gone, like someone had yanked it on a string into the sky. I craned my neck and looked up through the windshield, but the stars looked the same as they had all night. Nothing moving, no blinking lights, no trail. I stayed in the right lane for a long while after that, my eyes jumping between the mirrors and the shoulder. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like it might be something keeping pace again. I tried the CB a couple more times, but it was just static and the occasional distant voice that couldn't quite come through. By the time I hit Odessa, I'd convinced myself it had to have been a drone, maybe some oil field guy's pet project, but I've hauled through that area hundreds of times. The wind alone makes flying anything small out there nearly impossible. And it had been with me for miles. Perfect speed match, perfect height, without once losing position. I stopped at a Love's just past town for coffee and diesel. There were 2 other truckers parked out front, talking near the fuel island. I thought about asking them if they'd seen anything, but the words stuck. I just didn't feel like explaining it out loud. When I got back on the road, it was still dark and the highway was still empty. My hands were back on the wheel, my eyes scanning the mirrors. Nothing followed me after that, but I kept checking all the way to Van Horn. Even in daylight, I caught myself glancing at the shoulder like it might be there again, sliding along without a sound. I was working nights out near Fort Stockton, running maintenance on a small drilling site a few miles off the highway. That stretch of land out there feels like the middle of nowhere even in daylight, but at night it's just black sky and wind, with the rigs lit up like little islands. I'd been doing it long enough that the isolation didn't bother me much. If anything, I liked the quiet. That night, I'd finished up some work at a site south of town and was heading to another location about 10 miles away. It was a little after 1 in the morning. The sky was moonless, and the stars were the only thing keeping the dark from feeling like a solid wall. My truck's headlights caught the occasional jackrabbit darting across the Kalish road, but otherwise, it was dead still. The second site came into view about a half mile out. Normally you can see the lights on the rig right away, the glow bleeding into the horizon, but this time I noticed something strange before I even got close. Above the rig, maybe 50 or 60 feet up, there was this tight cluster of lights. They weren't like the big white flood lamps on the towers, and they weren't blinking like aircraft. They were small, round, maybe the size of basketballs from where I was, and they glowed this pale, almost bluish white color. There had to be 6 or 7 of them, moving in a slow, deliberate way, like they were tied together on invisible strings. I slowed the truck, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was drones, maybe somebody screwing around, but they were too steady. No sound, no drift from the wind, just hanging there over the rig like they were watching it. I pulled up closer, maybe 100 yards out, and they started to shift. Not flying off, not shooting away, just melting out of sight. The glow dimmed until it was gone, and the second they vanished, every light on the rig flickered. The big halogens, the little LEDs on the walkways, even my truck headlights, they all stuttered like a dying bulb. The flicker lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. The generator kicking off unexpectedly out there isn't just an inconvenience, it's dangerous. But just as fast as it went, the lights snapped back on like nothing had happened. I parked next to the rig and got out. The wind was steady but warm, carrying the faint smell of diesel and dust. Everything looked normal. The drill was idle for the night, the gauges on the control panel read fine, and the generator was humming along. I walked a slow circle, scanning the ground for any signs someone had been out there, boot prints, tire tracks, but the calish was smooth except for my own tracks. I climbed up onto the platform and stood there for a minute, trying to listen past the ringing in my ears. No voices, no engines, just that low, endless hum from the generator. I kept glancing up at the spot where I'd seen the lights, but the sky was empty. About 20 minutes later, I'd finished my checks and was heading back to the truck when I saw something move in the corner of my vision. Out past the edge of the work lights, the dark seemed thicker. I squinted, and I swear I could make out a faint glow way out in the scrub. Same pale color as before, just a single point of it, pulsing slow. I stood there, leaning against the truck, watching it. Every time I blinked, it seemed like it shifted places, like it was closer without actually moving. I started to feel exposed, like standing there under the work lights made me easy to see. I got in the truck, kept my eyes on it, and the second I turned the ignition, the glow winked out. I drove a slow loop around the site, shining my headlights into the brush, but there was nothing out there, just thorny mesquite and rock. The drive back toward the highway felt longer than usual. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I kept catching myself checking the rear view. The mirrors only showed darkness, but every now and then I'd think I saw something. A faint shimmer like heat haze hanging low over the road behind me. By the time I hit pavement again, the feeling had mostly faded, but I still had that odd pressure in my ears, like when you're about to go up in altitude. I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town to grab a coffee and shake it off. The lights in the store seemed dimmer than they should have been, and when I swiped my card at the counter, the machine took forever to process. The cashier joked about the internet being slow all night, said it had been acting funny since around 1 o'clock. I didn't mention anything. Just got back in the truck, headed home, and didn't take any jobs on that site for a couple weeks. Even now, every time I'm driving out toward that patch of desert, I find myself looking for that faint blue glow before I see the rig lights. And some nights I think I see it, just far enough away to make me wonder if it's really there. I was headed back to Alpine from Terlingua late one night after a day hiking in Big Bend. I'd pushed it too far, stayed out past sundown, figuring the 2-hour drive through the park at night would be quiet and peaceful. It was, at first. Out there, once the sun's gone, the darkness feels different. It's not like the city where there's a glow on the horizon. It's pitch black except for your headlights, and the stars look like somebody scattered salt across black velvet. I had the road to myself. No other cars for miles, just the hum of the engine and the occasional thump when I hit a seam in the pavement. The speed limit's low in the park, so I was doing maybe 45, coasting through those long, winding stretches with desert on both sides. Every now and then I'd kill the headlights for a second just to see the stars explode overhead. Stupid. Yeah, but it felt like the middle of nowhere, like I was the only person awake in the world. I'd just passed Panther Junction when I noticed something ahead, way up in the sky. At first, I thought it was a plane climbing out from somewhere, but it didn't move like that. There were 3 bright lights, stacked one on top of the other, perfectly vertical. They were too far apart to be on the same aircraft and too evenly spaced to be random stars. Pure white, not flashing, not changing color, just hanging there dead still. I slowed down without thinking. Out there, if you see something strange, you have time to notice it. The lights didn't move, didn't flicker. My first thought was maybe it was some kind of tower, but I've been through that stretch plenty of times, and there's nothing that tall in the park. No power lines, no cell towers, nothing. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder and shut the engine off. No wind, no sound. The sky was so clear that I could see the Milky Way behind those lights, which made them look even brighter. I don't know how long I sat there watching. A few minutes, maybe more. I remember leaning out the window, craning my neck, half expecting them to shift or fade. They didn't. They stayed fixed in that exact vertical line, like someone had drawn a ruler-straight column of light across the night. Then, without warning, they split apart. Not slowly. 1 second they were stacked, the next they were moving away from each other in 3 different directions, perfectly level, no arcs or curves. The top one shot straight up, the middle one drifted left, and the bottom one slid right. No acceleration that I could see. They were just gone, each disappearing into the black like someone flipped a switch. No trails, no sound, nothing. I sat there staring at the empty sky, waiting for something else to happen. My brain kept trying to explain it away. Drones, maybe, but there's no way drones could be that bright from that far away, and no one's flying them in the middle of a national park at night. I thought maybe flares, but flares fall, and these didn't. And there was no smoke, no drift. A few minutes later, I started the car again. I told myself I was just tired, that it was probably something ordinary I didn't understand, but about 10 miles down the road, I got this feeling, that prickling between your shoulder blades when you think someone's behind you. The rearview mirror was just blackness, no headlights, but I kept checking it like I'd see something if I looked at the right moment. Somewhere past the Rio Grande overlook, my radio cut out. Not just static, it went completely silent, even though the dial was still lit. I tried flipping stations, but it wouldn't pick up anything, not even static between channels. My phone, sitting in the cup holder, had no service, which wasn't strange for the park, but combined with the dead radio, it made me feel like I'd slipped into a bubble. I didn't see any more lights, but the darkness felt heavier, if that makes sense, like the stars were dimmer than they'd been earlier. The only thing keeping me steady was the glow of the speedometer and the lines of the road sliding under the headlights. When I got to the park exit near Study Butte, the radio popped back on mid-song like nothing had happened. My phone chimed with a flood of notifications. It was so sudden that it actually made me jump. I didn't stop until I was back in Alpine. Pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and just sat there a minute listening to the normal sounds. Crickets, a dog barking somewhere, a car in the distance. Everything felt grounded again. I didn't take that drive at night for a long time after. I was 2 hours out of San Angelo, cruising the long, flat stretch past the Mesquite Draw when the skies started acting funny. I'd been driving that route 27 times. My brother used to say I could do it with my eyes closed. So when the stars did something I hadn't seen in all those night trips, I noticed. It began subtle. I glanced up to check my bearings. There's not much to see out there but stars and the occasional blinking oil rig, and a few of them seemed to shimmer like heat off a blacktop. Not twinkling, exactly, more like someone had put a thin piece of glass in front of them and was bending the light. When I blinked, the pattern shifted. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been up since before dawn, and Waco had felt like a long way off that morning. Still, there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. A wind came up, warm and dry, and it smelled faintly of metal, ozone, I guessed, from distant storms or some machinery. The radio was playing low, some old Willie Nelson station, when the song stuttered, microsecond hiccups that I thought were the transmission. I reached out and flipped the dial. Static, then nothing. The dash lights were steady, speed steady. It felt small and explainable, bad reception maybe. But then the GPS went black, the little map gone dead mid-route. My phone buzzed like it wanted to call, then nothing. I eased off the accelerator. The road out there is a long ribbon with no shoulders that are worth a damn, so I pulled onto the gravel and let the truck slow. I popped my headlight beams up higher and watched the sky. The stars weren't just shimmering now. They were distorted, like looking through water. I raised my hand, not thinking, and the light from a nearby star seemed to smear around my fingers. The truck hummed under me. I kept the engine idling. I reached for my phone again. The screen was blank. I hit the power button. Blank. The digital clock on the dash stayed stubbornly lit, though. Always had been, a cheap little factory unit, and it showed the right time. That gave me a small comfort more than anything. I told myself my phone needed a charge, that my GPS had glitched, that I was seeing things because I'd skipped too many meals. I was used to fixing things, tuning them, making them run right. I could fix this. Then the truck's electronics started dying one by one. The stereo went dead, the instrument cluster dimmed, then black. The little fan I'd tapped on for the night heat stopped. The engine hiccuped and slowed. I tried the key. Nothing. The truck rolled to a stop like someone had put their hand on the back bumper and cut the push. The only sound left was my breath and that high, thin wind. The world felt oddly immediate and very small. I remember thinking of all things about the jackrabbit that used to cross our place outside San Antonio every spring. I wondered absurdly if it was out here, that rabbit, seeing the same sky I was. I was also aware, deep in my bones, that I was alone on a stretch of plain where there aren't many people to look at you twice, and that made my shoulders tighten. It was quiet. The insects had that normal low West Texas hum, but it seemed a step quieter, as if someone had turned their volume down. My chest kept beating loud and my throat felt dry. I opened the door to step out and check under the hood because I'm the kind that looks under a hood when something's wrong, and because movement felt better than sitting with nothing happening. The air out there was cooler, and the smell of metal was clearer, like after a lightning storm, but there wasn't a storm. No drums of thunder. The truck radio's antenna had a light I never looked at. It was dark. I walked a slow circle and found nothing amiss. No people, no lights in the distance other than the stars bent like spoons. 5 minutes, I thought. That's what I told myself I'd wait. 5 minutes, and then I'd call roadside or my sister or somebody. I sat back in the truck and watched the clock on the dash. The digital numbers were stubborn, 3 digits deep and steady. 2:13. I put my head back on the seat and tried to breathe steady. The sky shifted again. The stars rearranged in a small ripple, and the wind dropped to nothing. With the silence, it felt bigger somehow, like the space between my ears had room in it. I kept checking the dashboard, watching those numbers for any sign. 2:14, 2:15. I thought of what a mechanic told me once when my brakes were squealing. An engine is an organ. It needs its rhythm. That phrase echoed dumbly in my head. At 2:18, my phone buzzed across the seat like someone had slapped it awake. I looked down and the screen lit up with an incoming message. "You still there?" From my brother. He'd been half asleep back home and called earlier to make sure I didn't hit the big thunderstorm predicted out by Lubbock. I thumbed at it, and the screen responded like a pet waking up. The GPS came back with a shy beep. The stereo spun its little motor and sought a station. The engine gulped when I turned the key. Everything clicked back on at once, the way a set of lights do when someone flips a breaker. The radio came to life with a smear of a song. The instrument cluster glowed, the clock ticked over like it had not moved. I felt sudden ridiculous relief, which made me feel childish and brittle at once. I drove on, keeping a cautious speed, eyes peeled for the lone bump of something on the horizon that might have caused it. The plane was the plane. Distant pump jacks nodded, a farm light blinked here and there. No glows, no figures. My phone log showed a gap, an absolutely impossible silence. No calls, none. 5 minutes of nothing. The dash clock, annoyingly, had kept marching without pausing. At a gas stop in San Angelo, hands still a little shaky, I told the kid behind the counter that my truck had died out on the draw. He nodded like you'd nod about a busted radiator this summer. "Could be a short," he said. "We get storms or power flickers." He didn't like to say weird. Folks around here don't speak loud about the things that don't square. Back home that night, my sister and I sat on my mom's porch drinking coffee out of paper cups, watching cottonwoods set like ghosts against the sky. We'd texted each other during the drive, and she told me she'd had a short blackout at the house around the same time, across town. I thought of the stars bending like glass and the dead electronics and how normal my hands looked washing a dish afterwards. I haven't had a sensible, mechanical explanation that fits every piece of it. Why the clock kept time when everything else went dark. Why everything came back exactly 5 minutes later. I know what I felt, small and watched and oddly quiet. I know the map on my phone blacked out and then returned, like someone had paused my view and then unpaused it. I drive that stretch again sometimes because it's part of the route and part of the day. I keep looking up, Maybe out there nothing will happen but stars and wind and the occasional jackrabbit. Maybe that's all there ever was. But sometimes I catch a shimmer in a star and my fingers go numb for a second, like the truck's key in my palm before the engine starts, waiting to see what the sky will do next. I was unrolling down I-10 just past the orange exit when I saw it, sitting over the median like somebody had set a light out to air the road. No more than maybe 100 feet off the ground, bright as a headlamp but steady, no flare, no pulsing, and it wasn't moving. I'd hauled through Beaumont an hour before, and the sky had that washed-out blue you get at dawn, humidity thick enough to put a sheen on the dash. The thing looked wrong, right off, too clean, too precise, and it made the whole strip of grass under it look flat, like the air there had been ironed. Name's Earl Mercer. Folks call me Beau. I run a reefer out of Houston, and I don't stop unless I need fuel or the DOT makes me. I don't usually slow for pretty lights. But this one sat right where the median dips near the Sabine turnoff, and it was just hanging there, like a dropped coin. I eased the Freightliner over to the shoulder, hazards blinking, left the engine ticking down. Reflex, I guess. Curiosity's what pays the bills when you drive alone for 40 hours. When I cut the key and stepped out, the warm night swallowed me. Sound tightened up, like the truck and the highway had agreed to hush for a minute. I remember the smell, diesel and cut grass and the sweet copper of the bayou water off to my right. The light over the median made things odd. The grass looked almost washed out, but there was no shadow. It threw light the way a lamp throws light, everywhere, not the way the sun does. No crisp shadow under the bridge supports, nothing like a glow from a weld. It just sat there and made the world brighter where it wanted and normal where it didn't. I pulled my phone out more to get a picture than because I believed I'd catch anything useful. The screen came on, pixel bright, then flickered, then red. No service. I laughed a little, of course, but my hands weren't steady. The truck's radio, which had been on low with an AM station crooning about road reports, hummed and then went soft, like somebody turned the volume knob with gloved fingers. When I clicked the power, it sparked with static, and the whole gauge cluster dimmed like dawn. There's a rest area maybe a mile ahead, and a county trooper sometimes parks up that way when he's doing paperwork. I debated driving up to him, call it in, see if someone else was looking. But the light sat there, and the laugh in my chest turned hollow. I figured I'd walk out a bit onto the shoulder and see if I could tell what was under it. Roads have things on them. Cardboard boxes, lost hubcaps, even hungover deer some mornings. You notice missing things more than you notice new things. When I stepped off the gravel, the hairs on my forearms stood up, the kind of thing you get before a thunderhead or when a dog tilts its head at something you can't see. Rosy-faced sun cresting the pines to the south would have come in maybe 20 minutes. It was still that blue-gray time. The object, call it light because that's what it looked like, was the size of a basketball held at arm's length. It didn't hum. It didn't throw heat. It didn't reflect into the puddles and the ruts, and it didn't glint off a single blade of grass the way sodium vapor does. I knew all the lights around Orange, refinery flares, tower beacons. This wasn't any of them. I got maybe 30 feet from the median edge, and the air shifted again, like somebody stepped into a quiet room and put a hand on the wall. I swear I felt a pressure, small and clean. My phone died in my palm. It went from a black bar to a black flat and stayed that way. The little flashlight on the truck key fob blinked and then quit, like a firefly had been gently put out. I heard the highway, far away, the shush of tires, then nothing but the rattle of a loose sign half a mile back. There were other small things that don't mean anything on their own, but add up in a way that makes you keep your hand on the pistol grip. The truck's daytime LEDs flickered like someone was strobing them with a finger. My digital log, that little tablet they gave us to keep our times, flashed an error, sensor fault, and then restarted like nothing had happened. I could smell coffee from another truck 2 rigs down, but when I looked, the driver's cab sat dark and still. I didn't yell at the thing. I didn't talk to it. I don't do that. I stood there and let my eyes adjust and tried to reconcile what I'd known all night about what lights should or shouldn't do with what was sitting above that grassy strip. It had edges, like the outline of a thing. It had a core of brightness that didn't burn your vision away. You could look and not have to pull back. Off to the west, the refineries began their slow glow, usual, boring, accountable things, and you could see their orange halos with no trouble. This light had no halo. It was just itself. A pickup rolled up behind me, slow, because folks look when a truck's on the shoulder. A guy inside was looking too, hand cupped at his brow. He stopped, rolled down a window, and asked through the glass without moving his mouth much, "You see that man?" His voice sounded like a tape recorder. I nodded, and he swung his head toward the median. Then he started his engine and tore off like it had finally decided to chase him. I watched his tail lights smear away and felt a little stupid for wanting company more than anything else. Then it happened in a way that made my stomach drop. The core of the light simply softened, like someone had taken a damp cloth and started to wipe it away. Not a blink. No, more like evaporation. 1 second it was there, steady and perfect. The next it blurred on the edges, like heat over asphalt, and then the blur thinned and there was nothing. No fizzle, no pop of ozone, no crackle of energy. The air where it had been went back to the ordinary gray of pre-dawn. The grass trembled under a wind that hadn't been there before. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 1 bar, a text from dispatch asking if I was out of the way, and then went quiet. I took 1 step toward where it had been, heels sinking into mud. No scorch mark, no puddle, no scrap of reflector tape, nothing. If you'd come by a few minutes earlier, you'd swear a thing had been hovering. If you came a few minutes later, you'd have seen the highway, the same as it always was, a median of grass and the same telephone pole crooked at the same lean. My mouth tasted like pennies. I climbed back in the cab and let the heater hum a minute and tried to act normal. Checked the mirrors, flicked the blinkers. I pulled a log entry into the tablet and it read clean. Start time, location, miles logged. No error now. The radio found a station and the DJ's voice filled the cab like nothing had stooped by. For a long time, after I pulled back onto the interstate, I kept looking in the mirrors, as if maybe a light might reconstitute itself over that strip of grass and watch me pass. By the time I rolled into the fuel lane at the next truck stop, I told myself a dozen plain-spoken things. Heat mirage, reflection off a trailer, a prank, tiredness. Maybe one of those is true. Maybe they all are, in part. I logged an extra hour on my book and put the event down as sighting. That's what the company form calls anything unusual. And I didn't call the dispatcher to say I saw God only knows what hovering over a restive median off I-10. People have all sorts of reasons to be wrong about what their eyes see at 2 in the morning. I still think about the way the light didn't throw a shadow and how my phone blacked out like a blown bulb. I still wake with that tiny tightness behind my sternum when the morning's thick and wet, like the night hasn't quite finished with its secrets. I made delivery in Beaumont on time. I ate pizza out of a box and drank coffee that morning, and I did my job. The road was the same road, only the memory of that thing sitting low over the median, perfectly still and then simply dissolving into the dawn. That's the part I can't fit back into the world the way it was before. My name's Tommy Ray Carter, and I'd been hunting the same ridge in the piney woods for pretty much my whole life. Dad took me out there as soon as I could walk steady, and I can still point out the white oak with the hollow low limb where we used to hide canteens. The place is out by the Angelina National Forest line. Thick pine, stands of yaupon, and enough deer to keep you busy if you know where to look. This year, I was running a solo sit more than usual. Work's been that kind of busy where you take what you can get, so I'd grab a couple hours at dusk when the light goes soft and the woods wake up a little different. I like the quiet in that time before dark, the way the last sun through the pines turns everything warm and orange. I'd parked off a rutted logging road and hoofed to my stand, a plywood box hung against a big loblolly. The thermos was hot, the rifle was clean, and my hound, Bo, was lying in the truck bed snoozing with one ear flicking. I like to listen at dusk. to the soft voices of the woods, the deer clanking through leaves, the woodpeckers chopping. It tells you a lot about what's out there. That evening, not much was moving. Bo had been quiet on the walk-in. He's usually a mess of sniffs and tails, but he stuck close. I thought maybe he was tired. I got up in the stand just before sundown and settled in, the rifle in my lap, watching the temperature drop and the light thin. Then I heard it, a soft tapping, like someone knocking two sticks together, coming from up in the stand of trees about 50 yards off. It was steady, 3 quick taps, a pause, 3 quick taps again. I'd heard owls and woodpeckers, and sometimes a squirrel will scrap a limb just right to make a little percussion. But this had a rhythm to it that felt deliberate. It didn't sound like an animal, too clean, too regular. I waited. On a ridge, you learn to let things tell you what they are, and if you make a fuss, you miss it. The tapping kept to its pattern for a minute, not loud, like someone was very careful about making it. I scanned with my binoculars, but all I could see was trunks and shadow. The last light was falling out of the maple leaves, and everything looked thin and cut out. After a while, I heard something else that didn't sit right. The cicadas kind of tapered off, like someone turned down a radio. The birds stopped, too. That hush rolled in under the tapping, and it made the knocks stick out sharper. Bo's ear twitched then, and he let out this low, uneasy whimper. He's a good dog, never the nervous type. I called toward the sound, half joking. "Now what you got up there?" My voice felt too loud in the stand, like it echoed off a canyon wall. The tapping paused. For a second I thought it'd be a guy playing a prank. The woods have all kinds of curious people. But there was no rustle of boots, no flash of a headlamp, just silence heavy as a blanket. It started up again. Same pattern, farther to the left this time. That's what made the hair stand up on my arms. Things move in woods. Deer, wind, birds, and sound shifts with them. This tapping moved like it was aware of where I was sitting, patient and curious. I fumbled for my flashlight because the light gone enough for the pine needles to swallow detail. The beam's cone caught dust motes and a few squirrels, but when I set the circle of light on the trunks near where the tapping had come from, the sound stopped clean. Not faded out, not muffled. It cut off mid-phrase like someone snapped a finger. A pulsing glow lingered in the dark right at the edge of where the beam hit. It wasn't a lamp. It had no source I could find. The color was wrong for firefly or ember, a soft white blue that breathed, dimmed, brightened, dimmed. It hung at about shoulder height of the average man, just beyond a tangle of young pines, and it seemed to be keeping out of sight, peeking around trunks. I didn't like leaving the stand, but I also don't like sitting frozen with a thing watching. I eased down the ladder and let the flashlight lead. Bo shook himself awake and padded along beside me, nose down. The second my boots hit the leaf litter, the light pulsed once and went dim, like it was listening. The woods felt close in. The trunks seemed to lean. I walked to where the glow had been. On the ground, the pine needles were neat, no fresh tracks I could see. The duff held a little shimmer from the flashlight, but no footprints, no broken twigs. The glow didn't come back at first. I stood there for a breath and the tapping started again, somewhere higher now, deeper in the canopy. It was less regular, as if whatever had been doing the knocking had gotten unsettled. I raised my light toward the sound and swept slow. The beam caught spiders, a bird's eye that blinked like a jewel, a raccoon slouching away in a black patch. When I aimed into the thicker part, the glow returned, faint and pulsing through the trunks like a breath between trees. It stayed just out of direct sight, an impression of something rather than a thing. I moved, careful, basketed the flashlight with both hands, and tried to keep the noise down. Every time the beam touched a trunk, the glow edged back. If I shone the light up high, the tapping stopped. If I rested the light lower, the tapping resumed like a metronome. It felt, without a doubt, like we were in some kind of conversation, and I was losing the language. At one point I crouched to listen. It hit me then how small and human I was there. The smell of my own breath and sweat, the scrape of my jeans against bark. I thought of calling it off and going home and laughing about it over a beer. But Bo sat watch, eyes bright and fixed on the trees, and that steadied me. He's not a dog to spook over a twig. The glow slid sideways once and bit the edge of my light like a shy animal, pulsing as if counting. I tried a few soft words. Hey now, you want me to go on? My voice shook a little. The tapping stuttered like it was listening. Then, as if annoyed with me, the pulsing intensified for a moment, and the air went thinner, like a window opened somewhere inside the wood. I felt it at the back of my neck, a small pressure that made my scalp prickle. I didn't run, but I did back off. The practical part of my head was filing it into categories: animal behavior, prank, some natural phenomenon. Because a man's got to make sense of things, or he gets lost staring at them. Nothing fit the list. There was no logical cause I could find, and that in itself felt worse because it left space for the rest. When I climbed back in the stand, the sound kept coming, softer, a kind of score that hung and waited. The glow remained at the edge of the flashlight cone the whole time, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. I stayed until dark had fully squeezed the color from the leaves. Then I packed up and walked the short trail back to the truck, Bo at my heel, ears pricked as if listening to a tune only he could hear. I drove the ruts slow, lights cutting amber through the pines. Once I was on the main road and the trees opened, the sound and the light felt very far away, like a radio station fading as you drive out of range. At home, I checked the rifle, cleaned out my boots, and watched the dog curl into the pallet in the corner of the garage. Bo slept hard that night, deep and untroubled, and I sat on the tailgate with a beer and stared at the hill where the trees knuckled the skyline. I didn't tell much to folks down at the bait store when I stopped Monday. Old men there laughed things off, and I didn't want some explanation that turned it into a joke. I guess I wanted to keep the shape of it in my head, unshuffled, so it stayed a thing I experienced, and not a thing someone else decided I'd seen. A few nights later I went back because a man who sits in woods learns not to give every strange sound the power to drive him away. The tapping was quiet for a long time. Then it came. Slow at first, then a pattern that was different enough to make me look twice. The glow showed itself again, the same shy pulse between trunks. When I shone my light, it ducked back, patient and careful as before. I left when I felt the pressure at the nape of my neck again, not out of cowardice, but because there are things a man can accept and things he can't own. Sometimes I go out and nothing happens besides deer and wind. Other nights, the wood moves around a sound I can't name and a light breathes between the trees. I'll keep going back because the ridge is mine in some way. It's where I learned to steady a rifle and listen. And because the woods won't hand over all their ways in one sitting. I don't have an answer for the knocking or the glow. I have the memory of them, which feels like enough to keep me careful and awake. I saw it right over the water, maybe 30 feet off the bow, and I didn't have time to think proper thoughts before my stomach did the thinking for me. I was heading out just before first light, like I always did, out past the jetties toward the flats where the redfish hang when the wind backs off. The sky was that pale gray that looks like somebody rubbed it with a cloth, and the water was nearly still, which meant the tide was sliding slow and low. I'd hardly cleared the harbor when I noticed the birds. Gulls flew low and loud all morning, but there was a strip of air ahead of me where they wouldn't cross. Little black specks hunkered down on a channel marker, and the cormorants kept their backs to me like they was shying from a draft. That made my neck prickle, the kind of feeling you get when the weather's about to change. I cut the motor to idle, not because I was trying to be quiet, I was just looking. That's when I saw it, a pale orb, soft as a moon, floating maybe a rod and a half above the surface. Not touching, not making a ripple. It was the color of the inside of a clamshell, the kind of white that didn't belong in a sky that color. It hung there without sound, without wake, like a buoy someone hung in the air. I don't fish with lights on, but that thing didn't look lit so much as it looked like something somebody smoothed out of the dark and set there. I watched a while. The water around it was glassy, mirror smooth, and I realized the same breath I'd been holding for the birds I'd been holding for it. Bo was in the cuddy, snoring until I shoved my hand under his chin and felt his jaw go still. I reached for the radio on the dash out of habit. Old boys out here talk to the Coast Guard, to each other, to wind and things. The crackle tells you something's real. The speaker made a little sputter and then nothing. Static swallowed everything. The GPS blinked the route to the flats, and then the little blue dot froze like it was trying to run before it could. My phone, useless for maps these days but good for a clock, flicked and died, then came back like it had been asleep. That one thing, the orb sitting there, and a handful of small failures in my instruments as if somebody had set the world to pause. I idled closer. I don't know why. Maybe it's in a man. If you grew up around water, you can't help the habit of closing distance, checking a thing with your own eyes. You don't set a net on it, you just look. The closer I came, the less it felt like a light, and the more it felt like a thing that had been placed to watch me. There was no reflection of it on the surface, which is what stuck in me most. You expect brightness to make ripples, to call fish. This called nothing. The oil smell from the engine faded to a clean metallic scent, like before a storm. I could hear my own breathing. The gulls cut out their chatter all the same along the channel, which is when my hands started to shake a little on the wheel. I eased the Yamaha down to idle and thumbed the choke. Boats are sensitive when you mess with the throttle close to something that don't belong. I was thinking maybe I'd drift by it, make a pass, could drop a chum to see what the base did. Stupid little tests fishing boys make. I'd been in boats since I was knee-high to a crab pot. You build up this list of things that make sense and ones that don't. That one didn't. When I was about a boat length away, the engine hiccuped. It spat once and then twice, and the tack dropped like somebody cut the string. I feathered the throttle, full in, smooth out, trying everything the manual tells you when a motor goes sour. The prop caught, the water whispered. The motor sputtered again and stopped. Nothing. Dead as a light switch. I remember the tilt of my head checking the sky because your head automatically goes where the answer should be. Clouds. Thin, not much. No rain, no power lines you could blame. I killed the key, then I turned it. Click. Nothing. Battery's good. I'd checked the night before. Fuel gauge was as it had been at the dock. There was no reason for anything to quit. The orb was still there the whole time. Not a blink, not a flickers, just that pale hush lifted off the water. You got that quiet where everything sounds far away? It folded that quiet around the boat like a blanket and made it smaller inside. Bo pushed his nose into my hand, and his whiskers brushed my knuckles like he was asking me for an answer I didn't have. For 5 seconds, I thought maybe someone was out there in a kayak doing a bit of an act, some tourist thing. But there wasn't so much as the sheen of a hull. No sound at all. No wake, no heat shimmer, just that soft globe hanging like something waiting at the table for you to sit down. I fumbled for the spare kill switch cord you keep on in case of stupidity. Threw in the key, gave it a crank. The engine tried to take a breath, coughed into the sea, and then, like somebody flipped a light. Wham! It came to life, smooth and steady the way a motor should. My heart had its own rhythm then, high and hard, and I didn't know if to laugh or to pull the hook. Right when the engine roared, the orb folded into itself and was gone. Not out of sight, not sliding back like a wave, but just vanished. The water took on its ordinary oily texture, and the birds came back to that strip of air like someone rang a dinner bell. The radio's static filled in again, and the GPS woke like a dog shaking off sleep. I did what any dumb man does when something strange crawls through his day. I pulled out my phone to get a picture. The camera came up and showed the sky all right, but the spot where the orb had been was blank, like nothing had ever been there. A clear patch of water with the sun's first line stretching across it. For a second, I thought I'd dreamed it in my head, because I'd seen the picture and there was no orb to be found. But my hands still remembered the weight of the silence. Bo whined softly, like he wanted to be sure it hadn't all been his imagination, too. I bumped the throttle and took a lazy, cautious run through the spot, looking for anything. Foam, a mark, a piece of something floating. But the sea was clean. The engine hummed back to regular tune, and the life I'd been holding went out of me slow. I told myself it was a trick of light or a bird covered in sun, but the way my gut tightened when I said that made me stop lying to myself. By the time I reached the flats, there were other boats, folks from the marina heading their own ways. I let mine idle and tried telling a story that didn't sound insane. Tommy from Harbor's storeroom gave me the kind of look that asks for details you don't have, and old man Ruiz down from the dock just shook his head and said, "You sure you've been out too long, Luis?" And he said it gentle like a joke. But I saw the way he was watching the sky all the way until his boat slipped out of sight. I ran the motor when I got home, took off the cowling and smelled for leaks and checked the plugs. Everything looked right. Spark plugs clean, fuel lines snug, battery terminals tidy as a preacher's cuff. The barn light hung over the tools like it always does, and nothing in the engine bay told me the story I'd lived out on the water. My wife, Marissa, laughed when I told her. Soft laugh, but not mean, because a man coming in from his day with eggshells under his feet makes the house feel odd. She kissed my temple like she always does and asked if I wanted coffee. I kept replaying the silence of it, the way the world smoothed up like a sheet, and the way the engine simply stopped breathing for no good reason. I went back the next morning, because you go back to spots that shook you, like you can find the answer by being braver or more stubborn. The channel looked ordinary, gulls everywhere, kids on the pier casting bread. No strips of sky empty of bird calls, no soft white sphere. I drifted to where it had been and threw a handful of chum and watched the fish tear it up, normal as neighbors. The GPS worked, the radio crackled, and my phone took pictures like it had never been possessed of any other business. Folks down at the marina will tell you 100 explanations, balloons, flares, a trick of the tide. Some will tease you for seeing ghosts. Others will nod and move on, like there's no point in looking too long at things that don't fit the usual lists. I tell the story because it happened and because it bothered me that simple things can go wrong around something you can't name. I don't know what that orb was, and I don't have a neat answer to hand you, but I keep finding myself watching the surface when I'm in the boat, looking for a place where the mirror gets cut and something peeks out the other side. I pulled off Highway 67 onto the gravel shoulder by the little marathon station west of Brownwood because my rig was coughing and my phone said I had 3 bars and a job to call in. The neon over the pump hummed like a wasp and the night smelled like diesel and cut mesquite. I killed the engine, cracked the door for air, and then, because I always do, I checked my phone for messages. The screen read "No service" in big letters where the bars should have been. Name's Hank Lawson. I drive flatbed out of Abilene, and I was 2 runs into a 13-hour shift, tired enough to see mirages if the highway offered them. I shrugged it off and walked up to the pump. The card reader on the machine blinked. The numbers on the digital display were a little soft around the edges, like someone had smeared them with a greasy thumb. I thumbed at the keypad. "All right," I muttered, more to myself than to anything else. Behind the store, a dog started barking. Sharp, insistent. Then the barking stopped so fast it left everything in the air like a held note. The dog didn't pause. It cut off dead. You noticed that. You noticed sudden quiet in the country at night. The crickets down the embankment went mute too. The only thing left was the hum of the lights over the pumps and the distant thrum of tires on blacktop. I stood there with my hand on the pump handle and felt a small prickle run up my forearms. The glow over the parking lot changed. It wasn't brighter so much as whiter and softer, like the pale light you get inside a closed church when the sun hits a stained glass window just right. The whole sky above the station took on that white, the stars shrinking into pale pinpricks. No sound came with it. Air didn't shift. It just filled the lot. My phone didn't come back. The little clock in the corner of the screen still read 12:17. My wristwatch, old Timex, the thing that's been on my hand since before I had a mortgage, read 12:17 too. I told myself I'd been staring too long at displays and numbers. I sucked in a breath and tried to play it cool. I'd been out alone long enough to know when the road was trying to put something in your head. Then the truck behind me, a big double-axle dually, slowed to a stop on the other side of the pumps and idled. The driver's engine cut out and the cab went quiet. Somebody got out. I heard the thud of a boot and a curse. He called something, but it sounded like he was trying to talk through cotton. I called back, "You all right?" And my voice came out flat and small in the white light. He came around the back of the truck in a hurry, flashlight bobbing. "Phone's dead," he said, too bright-eyed. "Ain't nothing on the screen." He had that look people get when the world stops answering them, one of those looks I'll recognize later if you told me 10 years from now. We both stood in that white, and the pump's clock ticked like nothing had happened. The light hung there, like it had a shape we weren't seeing. My skin stayed the kind of cold you only get when you're trying to decide whether to keep moving. I tried the pump. The card reader flashed an error. The little LCD went blank for a breath and then spit back a number that didn't match the gallons I'd pumped. It said I'd filled the rig when I knew I hadn't pumped a drop. I stepped back. The pump clicked like a clock and then stopped. The other driver, a kid not yet 40, shook his head and said, "You see that too?" He sounded nervous the way men who grew up on ranches sound when they're about to confess they're scared. We both looked up at the sky and I wished for the stupidest things. Rain, a cop car rolling by, a radio that would come back to life with some AM DJ's voice. Instead, the glow stretched a little lower, like someone had lowered a lampshade. It shone through the rig's windshield with the same soft white that shows faces wrong and honest at the same time. My truck's telemetry screen, the one clipped under the dash that tells me RPM and temp and the like, blinked and then came back with nonsense numbers. The tack read 0 though, the keys were in my hand. The console clock flicked from 12:12:17 to 12:36 and then back to 12:18 like it wasn't sure what to do. It wasn't a dramatic effect. Nothing crashed, no buildings lit up, no thunder rolled. It was more like the world misplacing a page in a book and then finding it again. The dog barked a time or two, quieter now, then folded back to sleep. A tractor way off in a field coughed once and went still. That quiet became a pressure, sitting against my ears. We waited. The kid next to me started to joke about failing satellites and space junk because jokes are easier than other things, but his laugh sounded thin. I kept checking my phone and then my Timex, and both clocks held little differences like a lie. My phone stuck at 12:17, and the watch wavered into 12:36 for a breath, then snapped back like a rubber band. Finally, the glow thinned at the edges and pulled up and away like fog. The sky slid back to its regular black with its usual handful of stars. The neon over the pumps blinked like nothing had happened. My phone breathed life, and the network bars crawled back along the top of the screen. The kid's voice on the other side of the pump was sudden and bright. "Hey, did y'all just..." I checked the pump again. The total matched the gallons this time. The numbers lined up. The receipt printed, and I stuck it in my pocket, like paper that might be evidence. The kid walked to his rig, tested his radio, and then started up with a cough that made the dust dance. He waved at me, slow, the way people wave when the wind comes back. I got back into my truck and pulled the keys to my knee to start the engine. The dash clock read 12:38. My Timex read 12:17. My phone, blinking with 3 bars and messages stacking, showed a text timestamp from dispatch at 12:37 that I couldn't remember getting. My receipt said I'd filled at 12:18. I sat with my head between my hands for a long second. I don't chase ghosts. I don't write to papers or think in terms of things from a science fiction channel. I write logs and keep receipts and sleep when I can. But I also knew how long it took to drive the next stretch of highway empty and how long it took my rig to idle. 20 minutes is long enough to cross a county. It's long enough for a country boy to wake up to a calf being born. It's long enough for a person to get somewhere and be gone. I drove off feeling the rig heavier than usual, like the load inside had decided to take a nap. I called dispatch when I hit the blacktop. The operator's voice came through like it had always been there. "You good, Hank? You missed the check-in." I told her I'd been delayed at a pump. She asked for the receipt number, then said calmly, "You logged 20 minutes late on that last check, Hank. You sure you didn't stop somewhere else?" Her voice was flat, professional. I told her I was by the Brownwood pump. She put me on hold for a second and then came back. "No one else has reported outages." She didn't say it like it surprised her. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, the sky had the cold look of a bad night over West Texas, indifferent and clean. The Timex still ticked at 12:17 like a stubborn thing. My phone kept loading texts like it had been backed up with a tide. An hour later, my watch and my phone matched, and my dispatch log showed I'd been offline for 20 minutes. I could hand the receipt to anyone and it would say one thing, and the clock on the dash would say another. My brain tried to file it away under tired, under static, under wiring in the marsh. It didn't want to pick any of them. I told my buddy at the yard the next day. He nodded and said, "That whole stretch has got weird power lines, don't it?" He laughed a little too loudly. I filed the conversation behind a handful of other strange runs I've had. Mirrors on the side of the road that didn't look like anything you'd see. A fog that smelled faintly of metal. I kept the receipt in my logbook, folded 3 times, and when I crossed that part of the highway, now I find myself scanning the sky before I stop, like I might catch the air before it rearranges itself again. I woke up because my truck alarm started going off 40 minutes after midnight, and not the weak, sputtery kind it usually was when the battery warned me. A hard, steady wail, like somebody had punched the panic button on purpose. I went out in my flannel shirt and work boots, barefoot down the porch steps, and saw the fence. A 4-post run of the pasture fence near the back corner was bent inward so cleanly it looked like somebody had taken a big metal hand and pushed the rails between the posts. The top rail dipped nice and even, the middle rail tucked under it, and the bottom rail sat 3 inches off the ground, like the weight of it had been lifted and set back down. There wasn't a splinter on the wooden posts, no ripped wire, no bent staples, just the rails folded like a page. I walked a careful lap around that corner in the dark with a flashlight and couldn't find a single footprint in the short grass. The ground around it wasn't compressed by tires. My boots left prints where I stood, and that was all. My dog, Huck, kept his head low and his ears pinned. He didn't whine, he didn't bark, just breathed heavy and wouldn't let me get more than 10 feet from him. The cows were huddled in the lower lot where they always bed down, like their backs toward the timber, breathing in a slow, steady rhythm. None of them were trying to push through the fence or crowd out. If anything, they were leaned in like a small audience watching something out in the dark. I walked the property line to the front gate, checking the floodlights and the camera I'd rigged to the milk house months back. The camera's little red LED blinked on, but when I pulled the SD card, it was a blank file. The clock read 00, and the file size said 0 bytes. The yard light over the feed bin hummed like it was half asleep. My phone said there was no service. I figured maybe the power had tripped and the alarm cycle was still going on, some backup, but the barn lights were on. I could see them through the trees, steady, low yellow, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I went back to the fence and ran my hand along the top rail. It felt warm, not hot, just warm the way a porch swing does when it's been in the sun. There was a faint smell of iron in the air, like a new rain might have brought from somewhere else. By then, the alarm had stopped. The truck engine was quiet. Huck sat flat on his haunches and shivered once. I could have chalked the whole thing up to drunken vandals or some night crew with a loader if there'd been tracks. But there's no reason you can't see tire marks at that distance. My pivot road would show them for a week. I knew every inch of that fence for 20 years. The rails don't fold unless something real strange happens. I laid a plank across the bent rails and propped it with a post, the simplest temporary fix I could do in the dark, and then I went back inside. I made strong coffee and sat on the kitchen step watching the road. I pulled the radio up on AM and got static, then a Farmer's Hour program coming in faintly with the host's voice the same as always. I listened harder, and the voice wobbled like a bad broadcast, then came back clean. I told myself sleep had me seeing things, that I'd been dozing in the chair during that midnight trucker call and then dreamed it. I told myself all the things farmers tell themselves when the world kicks at the margins of what we expect. At 2:30, there was a sound like distant freight trains. It wasn't the kind of rattle the highway makes. It was a steady, low thrum that sat in the ribs of the house more than in the air. Huck rose at once and pressed his nose into my hand. The dogs at the neighbor's place down the county road started up, one at a time, a single howl that trailed off into nothing. The cows didn't move. The hum went on and on, so low I felt it under my feet. It made the pipes rattle in the wall and the cup on the counter vibrate the way an old truck bed thrums when you idle beside it. My teeth felt a little loose. I walked back outside without a coat. The sky was clear and thick with stars, and to the east there was a faint band of pale light like a rising moon that shouldn't have been there. It moved, too, like a slow breath. The hum wasn't loud enough to hurt. It was the kind of sound that seems to live inside your bones like a frequency that makes your molars hum. I stood in my bare feet on the cold porch, and every so often I felt it, a little push in the soles like somebody was pressing from underneath. By dawn, the sound had stopped, and the band of pale light had receded like a tide. The fence looked the same as it had in the night, the rails tucked in the same neat fold, the ground unmarked. I walked the pasture with the daylight and a pair of gloves on my hands. I checked